I'm not sure, but hopefully...
What's the point of public square?
Someone who knows where it is can lead the way.
Not yet, we'll see by the way.
Oh, right. Hang on, Callum.
Hang on, guys.
That's awesome.
That's gold it, mate, will you?
Gear picked up, that's restoring the cost, they can be down and setting it up. Right.
Okay, right. Well, we'll wait 5 minutes, apparently, according to one of my stewards.
Can we do some pictures? Is that
yes,
okay?
yes, indeed, yeah. God, I hope I look alright.
You want to get one side, mate?
Who's going to take the picture? The Sargon's big guy.
I ain't got you in, mate. Get in. Get that head in. Get that big head in.
Who is it?
Cheers, Sargon.
Oh, thanks, Callum.
No worries.
Yeah, maybe. I do like cheese.
Not okay by British standards, to be honest.
Oh, no, it's just nice.
British? What are you, one of those racist types? What do you mean British? Weather's universal.
Excuse me, I'm Irish immigrant.
It knows no boundaries.
British immigrant.
Clouds drift freely from...
So I've got this. I've run out.
I think band practice has ended early.
Oh my goodness, that's a shame.
They've lost all energy.
Video timestamp.
Yeah, but did you listen to this part literally
Has anyone
just
got a
after?
jumbo screen?
And what did I say?
I mean, I don't remember because I was like,
that was a joke saying that I'm going to be taken out of context.
yeah, and
I mean, you're literally taking me out of context.
and the context of the whole video is a discussion about lowering the age of consent.
Yeah, but I'm against it.
So it's still pretty yikes.
What was it? I can't remember exact time. 26 minutes. I think I said it should be 16.
Well,
You didn't listen to that.
I did. There was
What's the problem?
well, there's in that AMLC conversation,
Where I
which
said
is,
it
a,
should be 16.
which is a weird thing to have in the first place.
I
because
have discussions with all kinds of people.
yeah, and they're generally a lot more adversarial than your conversation with an actual paedophile.
Yeah, but he's a 17-year-old boy.
Yeah, and
I don't really
had
see the need to be
conversations.
highly aggressive to him.
I mean, you've had conversations with people of similar ages. Like,
Yeah, but I try not to be really
like
aggressive.
Muke isn't that much older, is he? Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah.
I'm friendly with him. He's like 23, 24, something like that. He's a good guy. I like him.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. But this is just out of context. I mean, this is also this is like the opposite of what I was doing in that conversation, and that's a joke. Like saying that I will be quoted out of context, and you're quoting me out of context.
I mean,
isn't that embarrassing?
The context is right there. I'm inviting people
Yeah, I know,
to go
but
look at the context.
you are ignoring the fact that literally before that, I say that they'll take this out of context.
I mean, you can just go watch the video.
Yeah, I know.
It's,
I was
it's
in the
not,
video.
I know.
I
I'm
know.
people in general can watch the
Yeah,
video.
they can. I haven't
I'm saying
taken it
it's
down.
not any more. It's not any less damning than the individual.
It is literally you lying.
It isn't.
Yeah, but it is.
It's
I said
a thing.
Yeah, but why
I
didn't
can
you,
be
why
quoted
didn't you
as
have a
saying.
timestamp where I
I'm
say?
quoting you as saying.
Yeah, but you're taking a joke that's not something that I literally believe.
It's going really badly, Carl, isn't it, again?
Not really. It seems to go pretty well. Where are all your supporters? Where are your supporters?
Complete bullshit.
Where are your supporters? Like,
Complete
I
bullshit.
seem to have a few. You've got what? You and this person who's a lie.
Oh, really? Yeah, unlike you. Unlike
Because
you.
that's a satirical statement about how someone will take me out of context, and here is a person taking me out of context.
Oh, I see. It's gaslighting. We know what it is. We know it's gaslighting.
It's literally a joke.
You say
You're
the extreme
taking
term,
things out of
and then you say
context.
I'm only joking.
Why?
We know
Why
how
is
it
that
works.
hard to understand?
We see through
Why
it.
is that
We
hard to
know.
understand?
We're not stupid.
You are. You don't know what any of the things you're talking about, and now you're going to run away.
Explain your
context. Flee, sir, flee. You've been shown to be a fraud. You'd better leave.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yes, you don't know what fascism
well
is. You don't know
done.
what the alt-right is. You don't know what I stand for. You don't know what that means.
We know
You
all
don't.
that.
You
We know
don't
all
know
that.
anything. You don't know anything.
I'm engaged
There are more anti-fascists than fascists.
There are no.
Remember that.
There are not more communists than. In fact, there probably are more communists than fascists. Actually, no, there probably are. There are probably way more communists than fascists. But there are a lot more liberals than either of you scum.
Libertarian.
Liberal.
Like you,
I'm a liberal.
pedophile.
I'm a liberal.
But you call yourself a libertarian, don't you?
No, I'm a
What
liberal.
that means.
I'm a liberal. No, I don't hate the
We know
government.
what a libertarian is.
No, I don't hate the government. I'm not a libertarian. Oh, now I'm a fascist and a libertarian, according to you. You don't understand the words you're using, sir. You just don't understand them. Look, I'm not against the government, so I'm not a libertarian. And I don't want the government taking over the world because I'm not a fascist. I'm for liberalism. I'm from a separation between the state and society. I'm for limited government. I mean, like, I went and visited the Magna Carta because to me that's a sacred text.
Manga Carta.
Magna.
Yeah, well, you said manga.
No, I didn't.
Oh dear.
I consider that to be a sacred text. Just like the English Bill of Rights, yeah, I consider that to be a sacred text too.
Democracy is your big thing, is it?
Yes, it is actually. That's why I'm such an advocate of free speech.
1 minute.
Well, that's why I'm an advocate for free speech.
Raping women, that kind of thing.
When have I ever
Funny.
raped anyone?
I don't know actually. I don't think.
Yeah. So you're just slinging around allegations about things you don't understand.
Why would you say it?
You don't know the
Why would you
context.
say it?
Yeah, but I could literally.
Is raping a woman funny?
It depends, doesn't
Come on.
it?
All the women you've got in your party.
Yeah, but
women
do
you've got in
you
your
not
party.
think there can be a joke about
Loads
this
of women
subject?
here
No, I
today.
don't.
Right.
Gay
Well, then why
people,
don't you
and we
complain about?
support him. I'm a gay Jew,
There aren't
and I
loads- there
support
aren't loads
this
of-
Why would gay
because
Jews
I'm
support
into
fascism?
free speech, and I see our country being destroyed.
Don't define my gender, man.
Kind of a bit. That's kind of it.
Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
That's all you are. You hate.
Nobody hates anyone.
He's being transphobic now. That's a joke.
Well, why can't you make it?
I identify as.
You love toothpaste.
You know I don't identify as a woman. You know that.
Is it not possible for us to make jokes about trans people?
You're transphobic.
Is it not possible?
On the
I
basis
suppose I just think, why do you hate everything?
Yeah, but why does
do we
making
have
a
to
joke?
hate?
Yeah, but okay.
There's more of us than you. So
Look,
you
okay,
will
look, I
lose.
don't care. Even if I was the only man in the world, even if I was the only opposition in the world, I would still believe what I believe through conviction, right?
This is not about leaving.
No, it's not about leaving Remain.
This is about
Really
fascism.
not.
The rise of fascism.
No, I'm a libertarian,
I'm a
remember?
gay Jew, and
That's
I'm
what you
supporting
introduced
fascism.
yourself to me as about an hour ago. That's
So
where I
I'm not
got
a
it
fascist
from.
by your definition.
What you are.
Exactly. You don't know. You don't know. It's just about name Right. Oh, wow. This makes my life a lot easier. Right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the lovely, warm welcome in Salisbury. This is, honestly, I've never been to Salisbury before. And it's to my own deficit that I haven't. Because I went over and saw the Magna Carta earlier. And I was just staggered. I can't believe this document is over 800 years old. It's the root of English liberty. It's where it all began. It's where constitutional government in the West begins. And it's just over there. And I just walk in and I can't believe there's not one guard. There's just no, it's just a lovely sort of, I don't know what the kind of word for the room is, but it's a lovely little room with stained glass windows. And there's just a little old dear who's just telling you about it. There's no protection there at all. I mean, like, maybe I'm just used to going down to London where there are guards everywhere. But it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And then you walk through the main street and it's just the most quintessential small English town sort of atmosphere. And it's absolutely beautiful. Yep. Yep. That's a great point. Yes, I saw last year someone tried to smash it up, but of course it is. Of course it's exactly. And it was Thomas Jefferson, was it, that specifically referenced the spirit of Magna Carta in the writing of the American Constitution, and it's absolutely true. You know, the whole thing behind the American Revolution is effectively an English Civil War, and they did. That was exactly in the context in which they reviewed it. These were their ancient liberties as Englishmen, and they were entitled to this. And this is already breaking. Oh God, this thing going to go well, isn't it? Right. So, who would like to come up and say something? Yes, please, sir.
Just hold it up closer, right, mate?
Like this.
If you
That's a good start.
point it at your mouth, and if you'd
Okay.
like to come over here just a little bit, so we're behind that. Right, what was your name, sir?
Matt, nice
Matt,
to meet you.
love to meet
nice
you,
to
Matt.
meet you, Mr.
Right.
of Akkad.
You
Oh,
got
yes.
Great. Right, what would you like to talk about?
Well, first of all, welcome to the correct side of Wiltshire. I hope you're enjoying it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to attempt to pose more of a challenge to you than Sky News did.
Oh, please.
So to begin, I'm a libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
I would go further than you in many respects in defending freedom, but actually, at this moment in time, we're so far from liberty in this country that I don't think our differences matter.
No. They're absolutely minuscule at this point.
Yeah, it's a point of practicality rather than the principles, which I'm sure we agree on most of them.
I agree.
So where I'd like to start is, why would voting UKIP for the MEP elections, why is that the best choice to defend liberty or to try and restore liberty at least to a minute degree, in this country.
Because UKIP are the only party that even care that our liberties are being eroded. They are the only party in the country that mentions free speech in their manifesto. They are the only party in the country that will even dare to challenge the politically correct orthodoxy of Westminster. They are literally the only party in the country that recognise the pernicious influence of intersectionality. We are the last line of defence on these issues, which is why we're getting such a hammering in the media. I mean, I find it very interesting how if you go back a year or two, Nigel Farage is a racist, xenophobic, Nazi, sexist, Islamophobe. Now he's the golden boy of the Telegraph. Ooh. Now they love him. Now bring him into the fold. Because Nigel Farage will ostracise, did the party leader have a tweet from 5 years ago that sounds maybe a little bit dicey? Get rid of him. Get rid of him. Get rid of him. They're very, very quick to do this.
Well, it's interesting you go to Nigel Farage as the example, because I think you said it yourself that UKIP and the Brexit Party broke mainly over personal differences between Gerard Batten and Nigel Farage. Now, as someone who's followed politics quite keenly and was a fan of Nigel Farage back in the day when I heard him on Radio 4...
Same here.
I can't help thinking that Gerard Batten might actually be the wrong side of this divide.
Really?
Well, the example I'll give is the European... In the MEPs, there are multiple groups that they fall into. So, for example, the Lib Dems are in the big coalition of Euro-communists.
Yes, they are.
UKIP, under Farage's leadership, were in, I believe, the group called Europe for Freedom and Direct Democracy.
That's correct.
And since Gerard Batten has taken over, he has recently moved them. I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but unfair. I'm sure you probably are aware of this.
Actually, I'm not sure what Batten's done with the
okay,
freedom.
well, he's moved the few UKIP MEPs who remain, who haven't defected. He's moved them to a different group called Europe for Nations and Freedom, as opposed to Europe for Freedom and Direct Democracy. And this is a move that obviously multiple MEPs have rejected, and so they've defected the Brexit Party, who have stayed where they are. And the character of this group is far different from the one for Freedom and Direct Democracy. The Freedom for Direct... It's a real tongue twister. The Freedom and Direct Democracy group, as far as I'm aware, features multiple parties whose main views is to try and increase freedom, liberty, against hate speech, etc., etc. Whereas the Nations and Freedom is the group with Le Pen's party in France, and the AFD and Geert Wilders. And that party, and it's a more nationalist character than the Europe for Freedom and Direct Democracy. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on this schism.
Well, I wasn't aware of the fact that he'd moved them. And honestly, I'd need to go and do a bit of research on the new group that he's moved into. But I don't know much about the AFD. That's the thing. I've not had the time to sit down and look into them, but I keep hearing essentially the same thing said about them that is said about UKIP. And I've spoken to people who are people I would consider to be libertarians who are in favour of what they're doing. So I'm honestly on the fence at this point. I mean, I don't think they're like Generation Identity or something.
No, the AFD aren't the they're not the I'm trying to think of the word, but light bulb giveaway sort of thing. It's that's more Le Pen's party and Geert Wilders, who I think stand for something more sinister.
I don't honestly, right? So I'm at the point where I don't even know if it's fair to characterize them that way. I get the feeling that there are a lot of people who stand for their beliefs who are not as bad as are portrayed, but become more, I suppose we'd say, hard line because of the way they're treated for holding their beliefs.
I mean, that's possibly true, but I can't see. I can't help seeing that Marie Le Pen and Geert Wilders aren't exactly pro-freedom. They just happen to be on the wrong side of the current censorship movement. Hello. Is it still on? It's still on, but me.
Yeah, well, there we go. That may well be in. It's working now. Look at that. It's the milkshake. That's what it was. They got us.
Hello. Yeah, this one works.
Right. Yes. Right. So the reason that I make this kind of delineation is not because I'm necessarily in favour of these parties. I mean, when I look at them, well,
they've got that kind of look to them from what I see as well. But I've not spent any great deal of time looking into them because, frankly, I never thought I'd have to.
Oh, that's fair.
You know, they were just something I thought, well, that's out of my wheelhouse, so I don't really care. But I agree that they don't look as libertarian as I would like.
No.
But I suppose coming from France and Germany respectively, what would I expect? You know. But I don't think that necessarily means that they're like the rise of fascism or anything like that. But to my English mind, they do have a slightly, like you say, unsavoury look about them.
Yeah, so I would warn against award against them as opposing censors to put in other people who aren't pro-freedom explicitly.
Yes, I agree. I mean, like for example, I always hate seeing the generation identity flags because it's, you know, they look like fascism to me. You know, that's what actual fascism to me looks like, and they are an identitarian movement. But I don't know the connection between something like them and Alternative for Deutschland or the Marie Le Pen's party. So I don't like to comment on them. But again, I mean, they're not the sort of people I'm particularly interested in getting in bed with. And if Gerard Batten did decide to join a coalition with them, I mean, I would have to hear his reasoning. But it's on the surface, it's not something I would personally do.
Okay, well, it's something, seeing as you have the platform and the ability to tell people about it, it's something I'd certainly like you to ask him about if you get the chance.
I certainly will, yeah.
And especially if you do get the seat, you'll have the choice of who to sit with.
Yes, I mean, I liked the Freedom and Direct Democracy coalition,
yes.
And I sat with them when I went out to Strasbourg.
Oh, okay.
And they were very liberty-minded. I mean, I felt very comfortable there. You know, they were.
Were they the people who you interviewed on your YouTube channel? Were they part of this group?
Oh, they were the MEPs themselves at the time. They were the UKIP MEPs. But the coalition, when we were sat in a big room, I mean, you know, Nigel Farage was there. You know, everyone was there. They didn't strike me as being anything other than a liberty-minded movement. You know, they seemed like a liberty-minded group in the European Parliament. So I was very comfortable with that. And I haven't spoken to any of the other people in this nationalist coalition, but I agree, it probably, I mean, anything that comes from the continent that is openly chest-beatingly nationalist is a bit disturbing in my opinion. I try not to, I don't like framing myself as a nationalist either, because I actually really like the way George Orwell described nationalism. He described it as not so much the care of a nation state, that's what he thinks of as patriotism. He considered nationalism to be the search for power in search of a goal. And so a communist could be a nationalist for communism, because it's about gaining power over the society itself rather than actually caring for what's already there. And I think that's a really good distinction, because and if you look at it, the way the European Union, any of them, oh my God, you know, people painting their faces with the European Union flag. I mean, that's the most nationalist thing I've ever seen. That's like hyper nationalism for the European Union.
That puts football hooligans to shame. It does.
Exactly. They dress like football hooligans for the European Union, and that to me is hyper partisan nationalism of the most rank kind. I can't stand it. You know, I mean, I would never do that. I find, you know, it's too much. We should indeed, but hang on a sec. Would you like to come up in a second and talk to me? Yeah, if we can. Sorry, I don't mean to. Right. So yeah. So that's how I feel about it. But,
okay.
I would just stress I'm not an expert on the machinations within the European Union.
Okay. Well, given your position, I think with 3 days
it is
to
important.
go,
Yeah.
I think
No, thank you for raising it. I've just been honestly, I've been on the campaign trail, so I've missed out on a lot of stuff.
Oh, it's my privilege. And the second thing I would ask about is of your talking about Tommy Robinson and the like, and about the unsavoury characters within this group and how they're portrayed. Now, I personally think that some of your comments about how the voice of the working class will always be rough. Personally, I find that a statement that I entirely disagree with.
Right, okay.
I think that we should have standards for public dialogue. I think it should be expected that two people can have a discourse as I hope we are having now.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's all that difficult to expect people to do that regardless of their background.
Well, I completely agree with you, but I think that that's not what we're seeing. That's not what we're really talking about. Because, I mean, if you know, whenever they have an interview with Tommy Robinson or me or whoever, the interview is always rather genteel. You know, he's not, he doesn't start, usually, at least from what I've seen, doesn't shout and, point fingers and get angry. Well, he gets a little bit angry, I guess, because he's constantly under attack. But I don't think that he says anything that is unacceptable in these interviews. And so what it is they do, and myself as well, I don't say anything unacceptable in interviews. But however, when I'm in a different context, I might make unsavory jokes or something. And that's the thing that they're complaining about. They're not really complaining about the way that individually they talk to him, because he doesn't do anything outside of the bounds of normal conversation. And I agree with you that when we are in that kind of context, we absolutely do need to have standards and morals and interpersonal respect.
Yeah.
But Tommy has a criminal record. Well, sure, he's a working class lad from the north. A lot of people in his situation also have criminal records. Sometimes it's rough, and it's very ironic that people who are very privileged, who went to Eton and Oxbridge and then got easily into the city and whatnot, they can sit there and put their nose in the air and say, no, I think he's a thug. And it's like, well, that's all well and good, but he didn't have the advantages you had, and the fact that you're too afraid to even have him on to talk in person means that it makes you look like your opinions are made of glass. It makes you look like you're protecting something. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I would take a different view to the criminal record, which would be that if we have belief in the British justice system, we should accept that once someone has served their time, then that is a clean slate, and we should treat them as we would treat anyone.
Yes. Otherwise, that's a great point. Because otherwise you are just hanging it over their head forever, and there's no redemptive quality to our justice system.
Exactly.
It's just a way of hurting people. And I'm sure that's not the kind of society we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, they're treating of Tommy Robinson as if he's Jaime Lannister, as he's been treated by the current show writers from Game of Thrones. But horrifically off topic, how have I managed to end up on this? Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was a really great set of questions.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Right, so would you like to come and have a chat with me? Oh, come on.
I just did want to say, about Kurt Wilders, what would Ian Hersey Ali or Douglas Murray? Sorry.
Yeah.
Kurt Wilders is just Douglas Murray, if you ask me. He's just Dutch.
Just that.
And I'm sure Ian Hersey Ali would support Kurt Wilders as well. I mean, doing what?
Sorry. No. If you just stand there. Sorry. Cameras. Right.
That's all I would say.
A little bit closer.
Sorry, that's all.
Right, so
on the class thing,
hang on, let's not jump before. We've got all day. So explain to me what you mean about the similarities between Geert Wilders and Douglas Murray and Ian Hersey Ali. Just
sorry.
For people who don't know.
Okay. Ian Hersey Ali is a very brave and incredible ex-Muslim woman who left her country of birth. To find safety in Europe.
Yep.
And it was the first.
She's from Somalia, isn't she?
She's from Somalia, the first European to get political sanctuary in the United States since the 30s, because the Muslims were trying to kill her because she criticised Islam.
How dare she?
How dare she?
I mean, she's been on the rough
end of it. She would support Kurt Wilders.
I believe so. And
he went to prison. He went to prison because he criticised Islam.
Yes, and Douglas Murray, what were the connection you were drawing there as well? How do you see that?
They're just both intellectuals who talk about. I mean, one's in politics, and one's not. One comments on politics, but they have the same politics.
Yes.
Tommy Robinson is Douglas Murray.
Well, he's not quite as eloquent, but
and you say that. I mean, it's like on the class thing, just briefly.
Yeah.
These kind of Antifa people I was watching last night after Tommy's thing. We're calling them fascists, and this guy said, "Why am I a Nazi?" He's a working class guy, and the middle class guy interpreted that as, "Why is it that I'm a Nazi?" But he meant, "Why would you think I might be a Nazi?" Because the Antifa guy was middle class. He didn't understand the intonation of the working class guy. He didn't, so he just went, "You're a Nazi because."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There is a big class divide in the UK.
They're talking past each other completely, and you're absolutely right. This is something that Helen Dale talks about all the time. There is a massive class divide in this country. The upper classes of this country do not understand that the working classes, and I don't mean to sound condescending or anything like that, but they're not like them.
And the working class, if you ask me, are much more like the Americans.
Absolutely.
They're just like the English working class. They don't have the snobbery.
Yep.
They don't. British people, middle class people, look down their nose at Americans. Working class people love Americans. It's a rite of passage to go to Florida.
Absolutely, I tell you what, I have a large number of Americans following my channel, and man, they love Tommy. They absolutely love Tommy. They think he is the best thing in the world, And you're absolutely right. I do completely agree. It's the middle class snobbery where they're looking down their noses at the working classes. And when I say that they're not like them, well, in many ways they're actually not. In many ways the working classes in this country didn't get the opportunities that the middle and sort of like the governing class of this country had, and so to expect them to have the same kind of mannerisms and sort of status in society and the way of looking at the world, I think is really uncharitable, and this is why I can't understand why like someone, like a pleb like myself or someone like Tommy, instead of being a great threat to the sort of moral consensus of Westminster, why aren't they just, brought in and treated like, a primitive savage from overseas? Oh God, well, tell us about your strange beliefs. You'd think it would be a lot more condescending and secure about the way they think about things, but instead they treat us as if, like I said, their opinions are made of glass and we're wielding a hammer, because it's like, well, look, if we can so easily break your narratives, then maybe you should have more robust narratives. Maybe you should be honestly more honest. Maybe you should be more actually truthful in what you're saying. But I mean,
that's just put Gerard Batten way up in my estimation. If he's moved over to side himself with Geert Wilders, I'm impressed, and I like him a lot more.
Right,
frankly,
okay.
I think that's brave, and I love the way he's stood by everything. He hasn't backtracked. He doesn't quite understand some of the PC stuff because he's an older guy. But intellectually, I'm sure he would give him the right.
Oh, as soon as I sit him down and explain, listen,
of course.
So, I was having a conversation with a victim of something, and I was trying to be charitable, and he's like, oh, right, okay, yeah, fair enough. But he is a very brave man.
I think he's a brilliant man, and I think that was a great move, and I'm sorry to disagree with this gentleman, but I think anybody who stands next to Geert Wilders gets my vote.
Right, okay, well. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
No, I don't like public speaking.
Right, okay, well, thank you so much for coming up. Yeah, okay. Hello. How's it going? Right.
Hello.
Oh, right, if you can just stand about there, that'd be great. And what's your name, sir?
I'm Dan.
Dan.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Dan. And what would you like to talk about?
I'm a student from Warwick. I completely disagree with everything you say.
Oh, fine. no, that's fantastic.
I saw one of your videos.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming up and talking. And I know it's nerve-wracking, but I'm sure everyone's going to be very kind, and I'm not going to be aggressive with you. I'd love to have a conversation. You have to make sure that's pointing at your mouth, though.
My big concern about leaving the EU and all that is we are currently undergoing massive climate change, undeniably. And how do you feel leaving the EU is actually going to do anything to help our, deteriorating climate?
I don't think it's going to change our perspective on the climate whatsoever. I don't think it's going to have anything to do with this subject. As I'm not an expert on the climate change subject, so I don't want to go into the science of it, but as I understand it, most of the pollutants that are produced in China and India.
And America.
And America, is it? Right, okay. But these are countries we have no control over. So I'm not really sure what we can do about this from our perspective. From a local perspective, what I think we can do is try and get unnecessary plastic waste out of the environment. I think that'd be fantastic. I mean, the last thing I want to see is plastic bottles floating down the river here, Yeah. So I'm totally for that. And they're not biodegradable, and they create microplastics, and so I'm all for getting rid of unnecessary plastic in our lives. I think that's a great idea. I'd love to go to wood and glass and fabric and things like this, things that won't damage the environment. I think that's a fantastic idea, and we can do that without saying, mankind is evil, So I think that's a positive step forward. What do you think to that?
How do you think leaving the EU, though, this massive power block, and then we can talk to China, can talk to America, and get them to do something is going to help in any way?
I think we can talk to them without being a part of the EU. I don't see why not. We're the 5th biggest economy. I mean, we're not the powerless, weak, helpless country that, for some reason, the Remain narrative portrays us as. And the European Union, it's not a stable power block. It's actually really unstable. It's actually, if I was in charge of it, I would think it was falling apart. And the second biggest net contributor decides they're leaving, that's a massive problem. There are going to be huge tax hikes to cover our deficit. What was it? Something like 8 billion a year. That's the net contribution that we make, that's going to have to come off the German, French, and Italian taxpayers' back. And I'm sure that the French, I'm sure you're aware, are still protesting about the fuel tax hikes. So how are they going to feel when they're told, well, actually, you're going to have to pay an extra bit out of your wages to cover what England's not, or Britain's not paying for the European Union? How are the Germans going to like it? They're about to dip into a recession. You know, this is an untenable project, and I don't think it can go on forever. And in fact, there was a study done, it was released, I think, 3 days ago now, that found that something like 58% of people in the EU think that the EU won't last another 20 years. So I'm thinking, well, it's not about whether we want to leave. It's like, what are we going to remain in? And I just don't see it as being a stable thing.
But all the like research and all these important things that come out of the EU that we don't see, for example, like my university is completely funded by the European Union, essentially.
It's probably not completely
and
funded.
Tata Steel.
Yeah.
But
hang on a second.
How much do I pay in student fees? £9,000 a year?
Yeah, it sounds like you pay for it.
No, the EU funds the research grants.
Well, yeah, for research grants, but that's not their money either. That's our money. We pay for that. And there's no particular... I honestly can't see a particular reason why any of the countries... Say the EU disappeared tomorrow. Why couldn't we just contact the French and Germans and say, hi, we'd like to set up an international research cooperative? Why couldn't we do that? Why do we need to have directives, handed down from Brussels to do that?
Because it's really hard to just go to another country and just research when you have to get through passports, visas, and all this stuff.
Getting a passport's easy and getting a visa's easy.
Yeah, but it just makes it that extra piece of work that we don't need to do.
Yeah, but that's really easy. For self-rule, I think that's a worthy price. I really do. I really think it is. Like, you want to sell out the sovereignty of the country for slightly more convenience when applying to go somewhere else.
But we're not selling out our sovereignty. We can do what we want. What can't we do under the EU?
Well, okay. Well, Article 13 is going to destroy the internet access, the social media access that you have at the moment. I mean, that's a directive that's coming down from the EU, specifically as an attack on Silicon Valley. And I'm the last person who wants to defend Silicon Valley, but it's unjust what they're trying to do. You can't say that Facebook is a publisher for everything that someone puts on it. It's unfair. They've got 2.5 billion users. That's unreal, isn't it? You know, but that's something the EU's doing, and that's something that's going to affect all of Europe. And the thing is, they've tried doing this before. They tried doing it with Google's news aggregator in Germany and Spain to try and essentially suck money out of Silicon Valley again. And so Google just left Germany and Spain. I don't think they're actually returned their news aggregation to Spain either. I think they've just left. So that's a service now that people in Spain can't even access, thanks to the EU. That's not making their lives better, is it? You know, it's one of those things where it's like, I hate this kind of top-down centralized rule, because the people who do it are A, not brilliant, you know, they're not the sort of, you know, genius technocrats that I know that people like to believe that they are, but B, and so that means that they don't really have a good working knowledge of how the regular people on the ground actually live and how actually experience the world around them.
Do you think our people in Westminster have any better idea?
No, I'm all for devolution. I want you know, as much power taken away from Westminster and returned to local areas as possible. I don't like this kind of centralization, this push towards centralization. I think it does alienate people, and it does disenfranchise
But then how are we meant to deal with these massive problems we have, like global warming?
Well, what can we do about it? What can Britain do about global warming?
We can reduce our,
But we're not responsible for it. It's America, China, and India, isn't it? They're the real causes of global warming and of all, you know, climate change and pollution. So it didn't matter if we went entirely green tomorrow. The problem will still carry on as if we essentially did nothing.
Okay.
So what do we do?
Well, we need to negotiate from a position of power, and we have more power with more money, more weight, more sort of people. You know, the bigger organisation. China are going to listen to the EU. China aren't going to listen to 80 million people. Or
well,
60,
I think that there are I think there are alternatives. I mean, for example, we have a close relationship with the United States and the Commonwealth. This is a large block that we can take advantage of, that we can use as leverage if that's the thing you're concerned about. And I don't see why we wouldn't. And they wouldn't demand that they govern us remotely. They wouldn't do that. So why can't we do that? That sounds like a really strong foot forward. And especially if we get even closer with the United States, if they are, I mean, I'm not sure about the statistics, but I'll just assume that, you know, you've done your research. If the United States is a major polluter in this region, then we can start putting pressure on them. We can start, you know, just advising them and saying, listen, you've got to start listening to this thing. You know, we can actually start having an effect. And then once we persuade the Americans, well, they're deeply interconnected economically with the Chinese. Maybe they can start putting pressure on the Chinese. But I really don't think the European Union has a future. So I think it's wise for us to get out, man.
I think it's too late for the European Union's future because we've left, but I think if we do remain for some reason, I think the European Union is better for us, but that's my personal opinion.
But what's better about it then? I'm really curious.
It's just the way that everything's done. It's all centralized, as in like everyone has to follow this policy. I agree the UK would probably adopt most of these policies, but countries like Hungary and all these other countries which are developing economically, we can have a huge effect over to make sure that they undergo these policies that are really good for the world.
See, that seems tyrannical to me. It really seems tyrannical to have a group of bureaucrats in Brussels who are not elected by the people of Hungary dictating what the Hungarians have to do. I mean, I was actually in the parliament where Viktor Orban was called up and they were interrogating him and they were calling him a dictator, and it was literally people who had never won an election to the European Parliament, the Juncker types, calling an elected representative of a country a dictator. And I was just like, this is clown world. This is totally backwards. These people are not elected and yet they're calling an elected representative a dictator.
I agree, it's not perfect, but it's better that we're in it than we're outside of it just whinging, doing nothing and
why would we be whinging, doing nothing and in debt? Like, why wouldn't we be prosperous? Why wouldn't we be able to, I don't know, cut taxes and encourage business growth?
I mean, we could do that, but how? It's not going to, like, our closest trade neighbour, France, like, we can't trade with them on a good deal because they're a part of the EU and they're not going to be happy with us, and evidently that's going well at the moment.
Yeah, but we'll just trade with other people. I mean, for example, the Irish economy is in real danger of no deal because South America is lining up to give us beef and cheese, which is what we get from the Irish.
But we don't want South American beef and cheese.
Why not?
Well, because it's like the way in which
he's joking. He's joking. He doesn't think you're a racist.
No. The way in which it's produced is completely backward.
Well,
like,
tell me.
Like the rainforest, they completely like destroy the rainforest to make.
Yeah, but that's Brazil. We're talking about Argentina.
It's every single.
Well, no. But this is the thing. It's Argentina in particular that want to sell us. And I mean, I don't know if I want to trade with the Argentinians. They're going to try and get the Falklands off of. And then when Jeremy Corbyn gets in government, he'll probably give them back. When I say give them back, they never owned it. But anyway. But the point is, there is a big world out there, and we can set the standards ourselves. Because I agree, I mean, we don't want low-quality food, but there are definitely unnecessary restrictions on what we can and can't do from the European Union. And again, I think it comes from a real position of privilege, because I mean, like the chlorine-washed chicken. I didn't know anything about chlorine-washed chicken, but I heard the scare stories. Oh God, they wash their chicken in chlorine. That must be poisonous. And it's like, well, millions of people in America eat this chicken every day, and there isn't a massive health problem. All it is, it literally is a wash to kill a bunch of bacteria, and then it's rinsed off.
The chlorine's not the problem with the chicken.
Yeah,
it's the appalling conditions that you can leave the animals in because you chlorinate it.
Yes.
That's the problem with the chicken.
But that's not how it's promoted in the media. That's the thing, that it's promoted as if it's going to be a health danger, a health risk to the public, and it's just nonsense. I mean, you can say, well, I morally object to the way they raise the chickens, and you should follow your conscience when you're purchasing things. I mean, I would buy free-range chicken. I wouldn't buy chicken that had been stuck in, ridiculous cages and stuff like this. But it's not the same as the scare stories that, you're going to get poisoned with chlorine and things, is it?
Yeah, I agree. The media does hype things up, but their laws are in the EU for a reason. There are laws like that for a reason, to stop people abusing animals like they do in America. Yeah. So, and I'm kind of glad that they're there, and I don't know why we would want to leave them. And
the problem I have is that where's the line of principled opposition to where it stops? Because when I went to the European Union, they were legislating the length of candle wicks, and I mean, if they're going to go down, I mean, that to me that seems like the candle maker's job. I don't think a bureaucrat in Brussels needs to actually tell people how long the candle wick has to be in their candles. And this is the thing, when you've got a group of very well-paid bureaucrats whose job it is to essentially fix the continent and make it the place that they think will be perfect, then they don't see anything outside of that purview. They say, candle makers, you must make wicks this long. I mean, that is just a ridiculous waste of money. And I find that to be an intrusive way of doing things as well. If I was a candle maker, I'd be like, no, I'll make the candles to the length I think is appropriate, and I don't need some guy in Brussels telling me how it should be done. I mean,
I don't know about that.
No, but it's the principle of the thing. It's like, well, why do they get to determine every single minute aspect of your life?
Well, I don't think they do. I think there's obviously, my opinion on it is, I can still do pretty much what I want, but I can't make chlorinated chicken and a few other things that I don't really mind. So I kind of think I'm happy to sacrifice this in exchange for the ability to, have sort of more sort of pressure on America, China, India to continue with climate change and all these other things that the European Union is.
Well, okay, so we'll have to agree to disagree.
We agree to
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Come round, watch wine, just stand here for us, mate. There you go.
Hey, good morning, or
Lovely
good
to meet you.
afternoon, whatever time it is.
What's your name, sir?
Nigel Smith.
Nice to meet you, Nigel.
Your name is?
Carl.
Carl, nice
Carl
to meet you.
Benjamin.
So, first of all, thanks for the
Can you hold
opportunity.
that pointing at your mouth.
Like that?
That's, yeah, a little bit closer.
There?
There.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
great.
first of all, thanks for this opportunity. I mean,
My
I've
pleasure.
never had an interesting discussion with a Brexiteer because I can't get a sensible explanation out of them.
Oh, okay.
So I'd just like to raise, say, 3 issues with you. First of all, sovereignty. Secondly, defence. And the third one is the Brexit bill. So I think on sovereignty, Scotland definitely does not want Brexit. If we do go down the Brexit pathway, we'll probably end up with breaking up the UK. I think that's certainly Scotland will leave.
So?
I think that's pretty clear.
I don't think that we can guarantee that. I mean, there were 1 million Brexiteers in Scotland. 1.3 million, I think it was.
Sure, but I think on balance, I mean, most people consider that Brexit will lead certainly to the loss of Scotland from the Union. Possibly,
I have to contest that. I don't think that that's an inevitable consequence of Brexit.
That's a matter of opinion, so we're not going to solve that one.
Of course, yeah.
Secondly, the Brexit bill. I mean, that's $39-ish billion, pounds, whatever it is. It's a big chunk of change. According to the manifesto from UKIP, we're not going to pay that.
That's correct.
How do you think our international trade relations are going to function if we're seen as somebody who basically walks out of a restaurant without paying the bill?
But that's not really what's happening. I mean, they've set an arbitrary amount of money for the next X years that they want us to pay, even though we're going to be out. And why would a country who doesn't have that kind of arrangement with us care? I mean, we're not reneging. You know, they're not giving us something and then we're refusing to pay. This is something for the future that they
these
want.
Are commitments.
And hang on, but we've already agreed that anything that we do have, like an international research commitment, we'll happily pay that.
Well,
because that's what we're going to be doing.
I agree with the last speaker about the international research piece. I think the Brexit bill is for commitments that we've already signed up to. These are often massive, multi-billion-pound scientific projects or social projects. We can't just walk away from them. So to think that we could, say, walk away and expect to be treated equitably by Europe afterwards is very, very optimistic.
Well, I don't think we would expect to be treated well by Europe, but that's because we know that they don't. I mean, have you seen the BBC 4 documentary, the Fly on the Wall documentary?
I'm not sure which one you're...
It's a very recent thing where essentially it was just a behind-the-scenes documentary done with Guy Verhofstadt and his staffers, and they were openly crowing about how they'd turned us into a colony. I mean, I think that the way that they're treating us is abominable.
I can't comment on that.
Well,
I haven't seen it. So
well, they literally said that they've turned us into a colony. They were crowing about it. They thought this was wonderful. And I think that the way that they're treating us is absolutely abominable. And it is imperialistic. So I think that, yes, we probably should break ties, not pay them any money, and then look towards the Anglosphere for our future.
The Anglosphere?
Yes, absolutely.
Where are you talking about? Australia?
America, Canada, Australia, South Africa.
Okay, so Australia has a population, 16 billion people?
17. And
it's not huge. It's not a huge economy.
America has 300 million. It's the largest economy in the world.
Well, Trump has recently come out and said that for him to come out and say that doing a trade deal with us would be less than easy is actually quite an admission from him.
Well, when did he say that? He said
that a couple of weeks ago.
Well, really?
I mean, in the same way I didn't see your BBC 4 documentary, you didn't see that one.
Well, everything I've seen about Donald Trump is he's going to give us the best trade deal. It's going to be
Him?
magnificent. Well, why wouldn't I? Why would I not? He did the same with the European Union.
He lies on everything.
Yeah, but he did that with the European Union.
I wouldn't. Well, we're not going to be,
But no. The United States and the European Union had a trade deal done in a matter of days.
Which one are you talking about?
It was a few months ago now. I'm sure I can find it if you'd like. But there was a trade deal that do you remember this, Michael? The trade deal between Donald Trump and the European Union. Yeah, but there was some agreement made very, very quickly because, frankly, I think the European Union is full of hot air. I think that they talk a good game, but if they come up against someone who's not going to give any ground on something, then they'll just fold.
But
and I think that if we... Right, thank you.
So to go back, I mean, to Trump and deals, I mean, Trump's approach has been basically a stick without any carrot. I mean, if you take his approach to dealing with China, imposing tariffs, I mean, those are having huge bad economic effects on the US economy.
But America's going to win that trade war.
Well, that's very debatable.
No,
I mean, I think we can see the American. Let me
Time
speak for a second.
magazine, I think, said that it was going to win.
If we consider that this has been the last decade was the decade of the U.S. economy, U.S. empire, if you will. The next century is probably going to be the Chinese or the Far Eastern empire. And if everything pretty much around us is made in China. Your camera, your microphone, most of the bits in the cars around here. So we can't walk away.
Made in Germany.
Or sub-assembled from bits made in China. We're not going to be able to walk away from the world. The world is a global place now. I think to imagine that we can function purely in the Anglosphere is optimistic.
I don't think we will function purely in the Anglosphere. I just think that's it. You're interested in being part of a kind of political bloc that will have some kind of international heft, and I think that that's the way we should go. We should essentially, move towards having a closer relationship with America and Canada, Australia. But I don't think we're going to stop trading with the rest of the world.
But hold on a second. If we don't pay our Brexit bill, so the big banks are going to have trouble enforcing credit regulations. Our trading with America is also going to be problematic because the big banks are going to say, well, that country doesn't pay its bills. We're not going to lend them.
I don't think you know what they think. I think you're making an assumption based on something that is a one-sided narrative, because there is also another side to this, which is Britain's side, which is how we're being unfairly treated by the European Union.
We're not being unfairly treated.
We absolutely are.
I think that's just
that's why they think that they're making of us a colony.
Well, I don't think they're really thinking of, somebody might have said that on the back of, maybe somebody did say that. But
it was in regard to Theresa May's negotiations.
Well, Theresa May is, hardly, we're going to go back and forth into an ad hominem arguments, and I think that's a waste of time.
Well, she's the Prime Minister. She's the one who created the deal. She's the one who tabled it. She's the one who agreed it with the European Union.
It's been rejected 4 times.
And she can't get it through the Parliament because it is literally a surrender.
Well, no, I think the reason why she can't get it through Parliament is because when we had the referendum, the second referendum, it wasn't clear as to what Brexit meant. And I think a lot of people didn't understand we're going to have to pay a bill. We've got defence commitments to Europe. At the moment, we're allied closely with NATO and with the US. If we pull out of Europe, our connections with NATO will probably be changed. They won't remain the same.
Why would they change?
Because Europe's not going to just let us carry on cherry-picking all the best bits and walking away from the bits we don't like.
Well, hang on. The European Union doesn't control NATO.
Well, NATO is partly a North Atlantic Treaty Organisation.
It's essentially America's empire across the West, yes.
Okay. Well, then we're dependent on America. So you want to change your ruler from Brussels to Washington, do you?
Absolutely. Given in a heartbeat, yes.
Seriously?
Of course. Why would you want... Of course. The Americans at least have a constitution. They are liberty-minded. They're not going to tell us how to rule our country.
Would you like to have the Second Amendment, everybody running around with guns over here?
We have guns here.
You really want everybody to have a gun?
We have guns here.
I love it.
There are more than 1 million legally owned firearms in the UK.
Not to the same level of gun ownership there is in the States.
I appreciate
there's a billion guns, handguns in the States.
I don't think it's quite that high, but I appreciate what you're saying.
It's a high number.
Yeah, but I'm not suggesting we change that.
The American Constitution also has amendments to it. We can change it.
Yeah, but we don't have to adopt the American Constitution to be allies with them.
Well, I think we're not. We could go backwards and forwards on this. I think it's opinion.
No, but we don't, do we? We don't have to adopt the American Constitution.
I mean, the last piece I think I'd chat to you about is defence.
Sure.
I mean, as I believe, if Brexit goes ahead, our relationship with Scotland is probably going to change. Our nuclear submarines are based in Scotland. We've got nowhere else to put them.
I don't think Scotland's going to leave the Union, and I think that if that were the case, we'd repatriate them somewhere else.
I would put money on it.
Okay, well,
look,
I'll put money against it.
Carl,
we'll see who wins.
It's been fun talking to you.
Yes,
I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine.
Well, you could change my mind if
you could change mine, but I haven't heard anything factual at this point that would do that.
I've given you nothing but factual statements. I mean, we're not going to have to adopt the American Constitution to become allies with America.
I didn't say we were going to. You're the one who's put up a straw man. I'm not saying that.
You said, did you want people running around with the Second Amendment with guns?
I said we're going to change from a Brussels dictatorship to a Washington dictatorship. Everybody here cheered.
Yeah, it's not going to be a dictatorship.
And then you said they
Washington.
had the Constitution, and I pointed out elements of the Constitution that I didn't like, and then you said we didn't have to have them.
Yeah, but you suggested that would be implemented here because that's the way Brussels does things, but that's not the way Washington does things.
Good luck, mate. But I think.
But that is the truth, isn't it?
1 million. How many people turned out in London on March the 30th?
I don't know.
1 million.
I don't know.
How many people signed the referendum to reverse the second referendum?
How many people voted to leave?
17 million.
Yeah. So just because they're the working class chaps
So you're talking
in the
about
north,
the second, but you're talking about the second referendum. In the first referendum in 1975, 72% voted to stay.
Well,
that
that's
was
'cause
2
it
years
wasn't
after
the
we
same,
joined.
was it?
Now we've got a second referendum. I think we need to make it the best of 3 and have a third referendum.
that's only because you lost.
No, you
That's
lost.
only, no, you lost.
You lost the first
No,
referendum.
How did I wasn't even born then?
But
It
but we
wasn't
had
the
the
European
referendum.
Union. It was a common coal and steel
Whatever.
collective. It
Dude.
wasn't. It wasn't the European Union. It's changed over time, and you're just saying you want a second
Dude.
referendum because you didn't get what you wanted the first time.
Dude, it's been fun chatting to you. Good luck, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much.
Take
Vote
care,
Sargon.
Kev. All right.
Thank you.
I'll get another gammon up now.
Yeah, I tell you what, maybe he's right. Maybe we should do best of 3.
Come
Maybe
on.
that's how we should do things. Sorry. Right. Hello, sir. What's your name?
Good afternoon, Matt.
Matt. Nice to meet you, Matt.
Pleasure
How you
to
doing?
meet you, sir. Pretty big fan. Thank you very much for all the wonderful work you do.
My pleasure. What would you like to talk about?
So I'm hoping to change tact a little bit and give you some food for thought, hopefully.
Please.
You met my colleague in Bolton a few weeks ago. He had the same T-shirt on, if you remember. He offered you a cigarette. And
I
you
don't recall offhand, but I was in Bolton.
You'll have to do a better job then.
Oh, sorry.
He mentioned the idea of decentralization. And your response to that was quite interesting.
Yes, no, I do recall now. Sorry, yeah, please carry on, sorry.
Good, I'll tell him that you said
Yeah,
that.
no. Because the thing is, if you say, I was wearing a T-shirt, but the actual subject is very much more easy to remember.
Okay, good. So this idea behind decentralization, I'm very passionate about it. It's something that I've been involved in a long time. And I guess the first kind of human technology that's come about regarding centralization is the technology of blockchain and Bitcoin. Has everyone heard of Bitcoin?
Good.
I think that's because of the type of crowd, because Bitcoin is based on the similar values to what you're spouting,
Okay, quickly, do me a favor. If you know how Bitcoin works, put your hand up. Right, so about a third, I'd say that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I mean, I don't put my hand up because I have no idea. So, sorry, carry on, sir.
Would you like me to give you a quick explanation?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the idea behind Bitcoin is the decentralization of information and the way that is stored. So if we have a ledger of information, which in Bitcoin's case is I sent you money, you sent him money, and so on, all the people here would hold a copy of that ledger, and all people would verify that transaction happened.
Right, okay.
Right, and if 51% of the people said that transaction happened, it gets posted to a block and made immovable. You can't remove it in the database once that happens.
Right,
yeah. And as a result, because of that technology, it's cryptographically encoded. The people that run that ledger, they get rewarded in a small amount of Bitcoin, right? So there's like an incentive to run the ledger.
Yeah.
So it makes it difficult to hack and corrupt.
Right.
The reason I'm bringing this up because the whole idea behind decentralization, this technology makes that possible on multiple other areas. Bitcoin is just the first thing. It's 10 years old now. There's multiple other technologies coming up.
Right.
But the fundamental thing with decentralization is that you can create currency that is it's controlled outside the system by the community that uses that currency, right? So it means you can have accountability, transparency. You can control inflation by the community rather than by a centralized group of autocrats.
Wow, I can see why they're trying to ban it.
Exactly. Well, it's a great point because the media behind Bitcoin is almost exactly the same as the media behind your rhetoric.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's almost identical.
Yeah.
And every time I hear that in the media, I'm like, I need to listen to this. Right. Yeah. So it's a similar thing. And as a result, what you can do is you can start to hold centralized powers to account by building decentralized systems of governance. So Bitcoin, for example, it's very early technology, so its governance mechanism isn't very good. There's other blockchains that have been built now that have got kind of concrete, immutable governance systems that once the decisions are taken by the community, they are immutably cast in stone in those blockchains.
So what do you mean by the term governance here? What exactly does that involve? Because I'm a normie when it comes to Bitcoins.
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever you want, right? You can build the code. So with Bitcoin, it's how the currency is inflated and how it's changed, right? But there's other blockchains where I'm associated quite closely with a blockchain called Steam. And Steam is a social media blockchain where the blogs that you post, once they are consensus agreed that post is kind of accurate and everyone agrees that it's a good value post, new money is created and sent to that blog, and it's cast in stone in the blockchain.
Right,
so you can't remove the blog. Right.
Okay.
So what it means is you can have free speech on these blockchains.
Yeah, and it's immutable.
It's immutable. As long as the community doesn't, if the community decides that it needs to be removed, say if someone uploads something completely illegal, the community can vote together in the governance structure and say, look, this is not acceptable to us.
Right. Okay.
So all of a sudden, what you have is the ability now to take Facebook's centralization in its politics and Google's centralization in its politics and the censorship that they're doing, and you can put this onto a blockchain, and instead of having a centralized authority which is always corruptible, deciding what stays and what goes, you have the ability now to allow the community to operate on these blockchains and decide what stays and what goes and what gets rewarded.
So let me put the counter argument that I think that would be made to this, and it's not necessarily something that I endorse, but I think that someone's going to say, well, what prevents sort of the social media, the Twitter mob, from just mass downvoting something and mass, then censoring it just using mob power? What prevents that exactly?
A few different things. So it depends on how you set up the governance. On the blockchain I'm referring to, Steam, you get it's driven by stake. So the people with the most stake have the most weighted say over what happens. But you can design these blockchains however you want. Right. So if there is a blockchain for social justice, great, let it happen, right? And let the social justice go over there and operate itself and downvote everything they
something
like.
Separate that we don't have to be involved with.
Yeah, we could build a blockchain, and as long as the community is representative of your ideologies, then it would reflect, the content on that blockchain would reflect the ideologies that you have. And that's kind of pure democracy in a way, because if the community decides that they don't like that ideology, it will just start to get marginalised over time by consensus of the community.
Right. So the next thing is illegal materials and underage pornography, things like this. How do we prevent that? Because obviously we don't want that to proliferate.
Yeah. So you can basically, if there's a lot of illegal porn, if there's one piece of illegal porn or government document that explains how to create an atomic bomb or whatever it is, right, that gets uploaded to these blockchains, because people will do it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
If it's sufficiently judged by the community that it's wrong, you do something called a hard fork, where the community votes on a consensus basis, and they can actually fork the code to a new chain, and that thereby deletes the previous content that was done. Right. But the community has to agree that that's what happens. So as a result, you can't. Governments, for example, can't focus on one person and say, you did this is your problem, you've got to go to jail, right? You can upload anonymously to these things, and then the community, so the governments would have to start taking the communities to prison if they wanted to censor them.
I know, but the thing is, how do we then catch the perpetrator who uploads the indecent porn? How do we catch that person and prevent that person from doing it in the future?
In the same way that you catch them on the current internet.
Well, how does that
I don't know how that works exactly,
no,
but I assume that...
I assume they trace IPs and
you trace IPs and that type of stuff. But people can upload anonymously, and they can do that in the current internet anyway, and they actually do. They have the dark web for that.
So, right, okay, so that seems like it would be a potential problem.
It's hard to stop. It exists today,
but
it exists there as well.
I'm not saying that the alternative is perfect, obviously, obviously it happens now.
The current system's essentially the same as what you're talking about.
Right, okay. Okay, well, is there anything else that you think we should know?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, maybe I'd like to talk to you afterwards, because we've actually built a platform that will stop you from being censored on these blockchains, and it will ensure that you can get monetized all the time based on what the community judges is correct, rather than what we judge.
Right.
And it allows you also to reward your followers, because on these blockchains you can create currency, right? So they have their own currency. So like the Bitcoin blockchain has Bitcoin, the Steam blockchain has Steam. You can create your own currencies and distribute them to your followers.
Yeah. And
because those currencies have markets in the open market where they're traded, these currencies have value. And thank you. And as a result, you'll end up being able to reward the commenters in so all these loyal followers here and the people who are adding value to what you're doing, you'll be able to reward them monetarily with these currencies.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. And now this is really interesting. I love the way that you're setting this up, because one of the questions I had at a different one of these was, what are we going to do when automation takes all our jobs? And I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because it seems that, I mean, in like 100 years' time, there may be very little demand for manual labor or anything like this. And I was thinking, well, I mean, is it literally going to be that we are a social media species? Because I mean, I make my living on social media, and why would it not be that everyone does this? Why would that not be the case? And I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't. Because when people, I mean, like, when I was 16 years old, I first got on the internet on a 28K modem, so it's just like, things have changed so quickly. And now, it's my career. And so when people have been raised exclusively on the internet, they've been on social media since they were teenagers. I mean, they're not going to even think that there's something unusual about using the internet to make money. And so, literally, I think we are going to turn into a social media species where everyone essentially makes their money online. And so, I mean, that sounds like the way that that's going to happen.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, of course, there's always going to be, as technology develops, there's always new industries that come up. No one could have predicted this situation, for example, when the internet was born, for example. But you're right, it will move more and more so that people have that option. But the thing that I like about it is that the reason that you're popular, in my opinion, is because you saw something that you were passionate about, and you were like, no one else is doing this. I want to do this to follow my principles and my passion.
Yeah.
Right? And so, hopefully we move into a world where people will be able to follow their passions a bit more and be able to monetize those passions.
That would be wonderful,
which is
wouldn't it?
Potentially wonderful.
Yeah.
Who knows, though?
Well, the thing is, right, ironically, this is actually the end goal of communism. That's what they want, is for people to literally just go off and do whatever it is they want. It's just that to get there, you have to go through the worst kind of tyranny. But ironically, and I said this a few years ago, like, if you just leave capitalism for long enough, it'll probably end up creating what they want, whether whether they like it or not, frankly. And that actually sounds like the sort of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, although I'd never thought of it in that way. It's a good point that you make. But the systems of operation, of governance of these blockchains, as long as the code is written with the values of the community that it represents within the code, then it should hopefully represent that community and allow people to have a certain full freedom. You can build these blockchains with full freedom. You can build them with full anarchy if you want, and it goes a bit crazy. Or you can choose, and the blockchains that are best built, that suit the communities that they represent the best, will be the ones that succeed.
Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. You alright, boss?
How are you doing?
There you go, mate. Just point it at your mouth and off you go.
Good to see you, Lawrence. You can take over in 5 minutes if that's all right, because then I can have a sit down. But I'll talk to my friend Adam first. So, Adam, nice to see you, man.
How are you, Carl?
You ran for local council in Surrey, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. And you did better than expected, actually, didn't you?
10% of the people who voted for me.
That's not bad.
Area is so blue that there were no Labour candidates even.
Right. What would you like to talk about?
This has come fresh now from the last guy you spoke to regarding the whole blockchain thing.
Mm-hmm.
What negative side do you see of using a blockchain system for voting? So everyone on their mobile phone has, as opposed to a wallet for digital currency, a voting card.
Yeah.
And each phone that has one of these voting cards also acts as a ledger. So every time anyone casts their vote, every other phone stores that information. So it can't be tampered with. And then people can also vote from their living room chair. So the turnout will be massive in comparison to what it is now.
Well, that sounds great, because one of my big concerns about digital voting is the ease with which it can be tampered with. I mean, like there was a hearing about the Florida vote a few years back that was a bit iffy, and I remember seeing a programmer standing up in the court and giving his opinion on how easy it would be to create vote manipulation software if you can do it digitally. And I'm a programmer. I'm telling you, it would take 5 minutes. I mean, you could literally. It would be the easiest thing in the world to write some code that could just flip it. But if it gets automatically written to a blockchain that is represented on, like you say, every other phone, where every phone is a ledger, so you can demonstrate that this is the case and it can't be altered, well, then that's that problem gone. So,
and the amount of money it would save setting up all the local polling stations. And
it'd be so much quicker as well. You know?
And, okay, on to what I was wanting to ask you. I suppose here's one for a big thinkery.
Yeah.
Can jet fuel melt steel beams?
I am reliably informed it can't, but it can weaken them.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, what's your opinion on the City of London, the Square Mile?
Right. I'm not sure. I don't know really what to think about it because I'm not an expert on it. Do you have a thought on it?
It's, from what I see, it's sort of a quasi-autonomous, sovereign.
It's got its own
nation,
police force. Yeah, exactly. And I obviously it's for, I don't know, I suppose big business.
And businesses vote on candidates and.
Yes, I get the feeling. If I recall correctly, wasn't this something to do with William the Conqueror? It goes really far back in history, and I think it's been inherited from the distant past. And I think that, like with all things in this country, when you have something inherited from the distant past, I think people are very respectful of that and don't want to necessarily tamper with it because they think, well, there must be a reason that we've still got this.
A city-state.
But essentially, yeah, a city-state in London, yeah. And so, like I said, I'm not really an expert on it, and I'm not even sure what it's for. So I was hoping you might be able to tell me on that.
Yeah, no, neither am I an expert. I just wanted to see if you had an opinion on it.
I should look into it.
It seems to be very corporate censored.
It does, yeah.
Corporate sense, that's the direction they're leaning in, as opposed to the common man on the street.
Yeah,
I think businesses in the City of London have a stronger voting bloc than the residents.
Probably. I honestly don't know anything about it. Since you're here, then, can I ask you about South Africans? Because I've met lots of South Africans. You're from South Africa, obviously.
Yes.
I've met lots of South Africans on the tour, and for some reason, a bunch of them have been pro-identity politics. Now, given the complex history of South Africa, I was hoping you'd be able to maybe shed some light on why that might be.
Oh, if you look at the university systems in the West at the moment, that's, as you know, that's happening in South Africa. The university I went to has got some of the best stories with identity politics in the world.
Can you tell us one?
Well, it all started with Rhodes Must Fall.
Yes.
A statue of Cecil John Rhodes on the campus. Yeah. Students didn't like it and didn't like what he stood for. And what a good way to get back at him by spending, I think it was 28 million rand removing the statue. So that's where it all started. Right. And then the fees must fall. I'm sure everyone's seen the videos of how science is a...
How does the shaman call the lightning, Adam? How does he do it?
We can't tell you that. You have to be from there. But that you bring up me being South African and that I stood as a UKIP candidate in the local elections.
Mm-hmm.
Checkmate. It shows UKIP's not xenophobic, at least.
Well, of course not. Of course not. It's a patriotic party, and if you live here, there's no reason you can't be patriotic.
Yeah, exactly. But like you're saying about the identity politics there, it's coming from the universities again. It's coming from, and as you know, there's a lot of poverty in Africa, South Africa included. So most of the kids going to university are, surprise, surprise, middle upper class kids with no worry about money, so they think they know better.
What a shock. So, since you're here, can we talk about the situation with the farmers?
Yes, we can.
Because I did a bit of research into this, and it turned out, and again, to no one's surprise, I think, that the socialist government, when they were seizing land from, I suppose we'll term them just the white farmers, most of that land wasn't actually going into the hands of the black population. Most of it was actually going into the hands of the party.
Cronyism.
Of course. But there was also a study done that showed that just the free market was actually facilitating the transfer of land from white to black people much more efficiently than the government was able to do themselves. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that. I haven't
I'll
looked
send
into
you it
that.
across
Please
because
do.
no, it was. I was just like, well, I mean, the capitalists have another point. You know, it was actually fixing it for them, and they didn't even have to do anything. But can you tell us about the sort of the background of it and the ideological inspiration, if possible? Because it seems to me that it's racial socialism.
Oh yes. It's Pan-Africanism.
Right.
Basically, it's during the Cold War era, and you know when Zimbabwe was still Rhodesia, there was a lot of, because a lot of the Western countries were looking down, obviously for good reason, at apartheid South Africa, at Ian Smith's Rhodesia, and they were boycotting them.
Right.
And the Russians and the Chinese, I think, said, "We'll step in there. How about you also adopt our political policies?" That's why you see so much strength in this socialism movement and it's really scary. If you look at a political party called the Economic Freedom Fighters.
Yes, I'm aware.
Julius Malema.
He's a lunatic.
If people think Carl has said some spicy things, Julius Malema has taken it way over the top.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
I know he will go on TV and say, "Don't worry, white people. Your time to go is not yet. It's coming. It's not yet." And you'll find
essentially a genocidal threat.
Oh yes, and and it bleeds out into the communities. And the scary thing is, South African elections were last week. They have grown from about, I think it was 3 or 4% to about 10% now.
Blimey.
This EFF party, and they want to, they working on a platform of eventually taking land by force.
Yeah.
And that bleeds out onto the streets, basically, because South African farmers, I think the murder rate amongst South African farmers, now you see most of the farmers are Afrikaans. There's still a difference in South Africa between of English descent and of Dutch descent.
Yeah.
You know, there's still a bit of rivalry there going back to the Anglo-Boer War.
Well, you know, if you lose a war, you can't get over it, can you? So,
but these farmers, so the farming population in South Africa is about 40,000,
right,
and obviously shrinking. But the murder rate amongst white South African farmers is about 157 per 100,000. So that makes them the most targeted demographic in the world, including war zones.
Yeah, that's worse than the murder rate in Brazil. And the murder rate, the sheer numbers of murders in Brazil is the highest anywhere in the world. So that's terrifying.
Yeah, South Africa's murder rate alone is in the top 5 last time I checked in the world. But the farmers are getting killed at a rate about 4 or 5 times that. And
it's not just that they're being shot or something, is it? I've heard some awful stories.
Yeah, no, it's I've been following it for a while, but you know, stories of putting a baby in a vat of boiling oil. I mean, that's not just there to take your property off you. That's there to inflict
revenge,
a bit more grievance than that. You know, people getting skinned alive and dragged behind their vehicles. And
I mean, like we're talking real savagery here.
Oh yeah, brutal.
Yeah, and like the suffering that these people must have gone through before they died is just unthinkable.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, it's you know, women and girls get raped in front of the men and brothers and that. Before then, they all get offed. That's the sort of level it is. So it's not just break-ins, and it's vendettas being settled, vendettas from the past. And that's the scary thing, that EFF has more than doubled in size. And it's only a new party. I mean, it's been around, I think, 12 years now, 2007.
Yeah.
And it's now 10% of the vote of the population. It's going to become a humanitarian crisis in South Africa, but no one wants to touch it because the victims happen to be of an unprotected class. That's
very interesting, because I spoke to a young lady in Plymouth who was from South Africa, and was it in Plymouth? No, it was in one of the tours. I can't remember which one. She was very angry at me because I wasn't being respectful with my language, and I asked her about the situation in South Africa and how did she think it was going, and she said, "Oh, I think it's fine." And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was just like, well, okay then. I mean, we have very different opinions on what fine is, I suppose.
She's not helping anyone there.
No.
By saying that. Yes, it's uncomfortable to talk about.
But it's
horrific. But it's something that has to be talked about, because it's going to become the world's problem not too far down the line.
Yeah. And it seems like there is an openly genocidal intent, and the things that are being done are just horrific. I mean, one of the things you can watch is Lauren Southern's documentary Borderlands, I think it was called, where she is interviewing these farmers, and the things that they're saying have happened to them they're just some of the worst things you've ever heard.
Yeah, it's you grow up used to it to a degree, because it is a far more dog-eat-dog world out there.
Yes.
Than it is here. I mean, it's so, but the amount that people have grown to sort of accept it as the norm it's shocking, and now people are starting to wake up and really get a voice. They're getting exposure again through the help of the internet.
Yeah.
They're getting exposure. I mean, the fact that Joe Rogan tweeted out that he was going to look into it.
Yes.
But I think he backed off on that because he didn't want to think of touching that subject.
It's not politically correct.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that people are shying away from it because it's not politically correct are actually costing people their lives. That there's no, I wouldn't know what the solution is. I'm not saying expand the British Empire again.
Yes.
But it's a scary situation.
And So I mean, I like to be able to talk about it when I can, although I'm no expert on it, obviously, because honestly, people have to be aware that there are. You can't just say this is out of sight, out of mind. I mean, this is genuinely a genocidal situation that is forming, and it's going to be horrific.
Yes,
and I'm very scared about it.
And it's not an equitable fight. I mean, white South Africans are about 8% of the population, so it wouldn't be a civil war. It would be a genocide if something were to happen.
Yes. And all of the political events in South Africa that I see seem to be, even ignoring the EFF, what's the ruling party called?
African National Congress, ANC.
That's right. They are trying to implement legal methods to seize property anyway, and they've been doing it. So it's not like they don't have the intention to target this minority, and they're the ruling party. So this is state force being used against the minority to persecute them.
But not even only with land, in the world of business as well. It's I think one of the only countries in the world that has policies in place to uplift the majority.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
So that's why I actually ended up here, because I mean, I've told you this before, going for job interviews as a photocopy salesman, and they said, you do realize this is not a managerial position? I said, yes, I know, but this is all I'm getting offered, being white. And they said, well, we just can't help you. And it's, you see, if companies want to compete for government tenders, they have to be, it's called BEE, Black Economic Empowerment.
Right.
They have to be a certain percent black owned, or they can't even put a tender in, submit a tender. And then this leads to a handful of very well-connected black gentlemen being on the board of 400 or 500 companies.
Right.
Just so that the companies can compete for tenders, and so it's making, yet again, a tiny handful of people extremely wealthy, and the man on the street is still no better off.
Which is why presumably they're getting angry and going to the radical parties like the EFF.
And with the rhetoric that's being thrown around, that you'll still hear it in South African Parliament now. If something's going wrong in the country, someone from the ruling party will stand up and say, this is because of apartheid. And apartheid ended in 1994.
Yes.
But it's still the fallback mechanism.
Yeah.
So in the mindset of people who are, because obviously the amount of people who have access to information on the internet there is very limited in comparison to here. So they're getting fed their stuff from the news and from what the politicians are saying that's being broadcast on the news. So that whole mindset is still being fostered, that this is still from pre-1994 government, why we're having problems now.
Yeah,
it's a mess.
Honestly, it's a really terrifying situation. Thanks for coming up and talking about it, man. I really appreciate it.
One more question, if
yes,
that's okay.
Sure, yeah, of course.
We might differ on this. What is your stance on complete decriminalization and regulation of narcotics?
Oh, I don't think any of them should be criminalized.
Oh, okay, there we go. So we
job
done.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there are lots of reasons as well. I mean, principally, who are the government to tell me what I can and can't enjoy, right? But B, it doesn't work. Prohibition doesn't work. A few years ago, the government did a study and found that there was something like 10 million habitual cannabis users in the United Kingdom. Well, it's happening anyway. It's just happening off the grid. It's not being taxed.
But I mean narcotics across the board, to heroin.
So so that's the sort of like the socially acceptable drugs and cocaine, things like that. And then you get the highly addictive ones, which I think should be treated as a health crisis, because a lot of these people, I've spoken to recovering addicts and people who are still in that sort of mindset, and it's not that they want to be there. Criminalizing these people is not going to get them off these drugs, and drugs are prisons are awash with drugs anyway. It's just going to make their lives even worse. Whereas we could take a more compassionate, humanitarian view of it and actually give them the treatment that they require, because a lot of these people do genuinely want to get off these drugs. It's a monkey on their back. I mean, as a smoker, man, I wish I'd never started smoking. You know what I mean? But now I do, so now I'm just going to try to stop. But it's one of those things that they genuinely need help with, and treating them like criminals, treating them like the scum of society, that's not going to make their lives any easier. I don't think it's going to get them off the drugs.
And more aspects on that, where it would be a benefit, is the amount of police resources that are spent. Is especially on petty crimes, where a large percentage of those are by users to get money. So a lot of police resources are being spent on policing that. It is a big money spinner for the criminal underworld.
Yes,
you suddenly
it is.
take that away from them.
Then it all disappears.
And then you'll get far less greased up police officers. Because, you know, if they're making money to the tunes of tens of millions, they're undoubtedly going to be able to buy some police off. If that is removed away from them,
problem solved. If we just decriminalise these, I mean, I'm not saying we necessarily need to have them legalised so they're sold in shops or anything, but you know, I think making it so it's a character flaw rather than a legal issue is a lot more of a morally responsible position, frankly. And I think it will help people out rather than criminalise them. And again, it's your tax money putting drug addicts in jail. You know, I don't see that as the appropriate option. So thank you.
thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
We've got to stop wearing black shirts when we talk to each other.
Yeah, but man, I know, right? But it's a slimming colour, you know. I mean, the dieting's not going badly, but I'm like, okay, I still want to look a bit thinner. Right, Lawrence, are you around, man? Yeah. Right, Lawrence, right. Would you like to talk to people for 5 minutes while I go and indulge in addiction?
I might actually. Ask him a bit. Hello, everyone. I'm Lawrence. Lawrence Webb. I'm the lead candidate for UKIP in the Southwest, and Carl is working very, very hard to get me elected. So a big round of applause for Carl, please. And I have to say, Carl is doing sterling work in pushing the boundaries and driving the agenda. As you all know, he is going to be forever linked with a lady called Jess Phillips. Every interview I've done in the last few weeks, you know, when you do an interview with mainstream media, the producer calls you up a couple of days beforehand and says, "Are you available to come on this show at this time?" And you say yes. And then they say, so I ask, what are we going to talk about? What's on the agenda? And they say, oh, Brexit. But you will be asked a question about Carl Benjamin, things like that. So I did it used to be called the Daily Politics Show. It's now called Politics Live. So I did that on Friday just gone. And I arranged it a few days before, and I was talking with the producer about what we were going to talk about, and I said, can we focus on Brexit? They said, yes, but you will be asked a question on Carl Benjamin. So I tweeted them with the little bit of footage of that very brave and courageous woman who came up to Carl in Plymouth. I don't know how many of you saw that, but this woman had been brutally raped, jaw broken, punctured lung, absolutely horrific. And she stood in the high street and told everyone what had happened to her, and thanked Carl for taking a stance as he has. And she thanked him because it was engaging in humour that had enabled her to move on from this. So I tweeted at Daily Politics. I said, "Dear Daily Politics, if you're going to ask me about Carl Benjamin, please show this clip." Guess what happened? I was not asked about Carl Benjamin, because they would rather, with their agenda, talk about someone who hasn't been a victim, Mr. Phillips, rather than have a real victim who sides with Carl. That's the state we're in with our mainstream media. They are driving the narrative, they have a particular point of view, and it doesn't matter how many of us, 17.4 million for example, have a different point of view, they will still push their narrative and their agenda. And it's pushing back by doing things like that Carl is doing that is enabling us to push back against this. So it was quite interesting that Carl was just suddenly dropped from the agenda. And I've recommended to all our candidates that if they're going to do an interview and fear they may be asked about Carl Benjamin, send that clip and ask for it to be included. And I can guarantee he'll be dropped from all these interview questions. So I'm here. I'm available to take questions, or if people want to have a chat with me, come up and we'll do that. Anyone?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, sir. What's your name?
Okay, Pat's my name.
Hello, Pat.
Right, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Pat Conlon. I'm on the committee, the local UKIP committee, and I just want to make myself known. If anyone wants to get involved locally,
okay, yeah.
I just want to say this for 2 minutes.
Go ahead.
If anyone wants to get involved locally, you see me, come to me, and you're very welcome to get involved locally, please. I just want to fill in on what has happened.
Yep.
Carol was deplatformed this week in the local esteemed grammar school, and as a result of that, we protested outside, and we're featured in the local newspaper, the Salisbury Journal, as some people have noticed. And anyway, we've UKIP's logo is on the front page of the local newspaper and in page number 3. And anyway, we've been doing our work, and we'd like more help. So if anyone wants to come and get involved with UKIP locally, just come to me, please.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you. You got next, mate? All right, go for it. Make sure you point it to your face.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. What's your name?
I'm William.
Hello, William. How are you?
Good afternoon, Hans. I'd like to know how you feel about supporting a man who is surrounded by mentally ill and emotionally deranged people wherever he goes.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Well, one crowd that I'm talking about are the people who constantly protest him. I've spoken to them in Plymouth, in Exeter, and so in Exeter, for example, there was a crowd chanting, "No hate, no fear, fascists not welcome here," and they were shouting it. And I was talking to a nice Liberal Democrat, and I reacted oddly, and he thought, "What's wrong with you? Do you want fear? Do you want hate? Do you want fascists?" So I asked him, "Do I look like I want those things?" "No, what else might I be reacting to?" And he couldn't think.
Well,
I asked him to think, what could I be objecting to? He couldn't think at all. And then I said, look at the people having a calm conversation and looking at the people with glazed eyes chanting. Who are the fascists? Who's hating?
Well, I think Winston Churchill covered this many years ago. He, after Second World War, in his books and writings, he said that the next group of fascists or people, campaigning against fascists will in fact be the fascists themselves, and that is what we have. It is, as you say, it is a rabid mob. As you say, totally irrational. They don't want to debate because actually they know that they don't have the strength of debate. So this is out of the communist playbook, out of the Frankfurt School. You pick a word or a phrase. As I say, I've been in UKIP for 20 years, and almost every interview I've done over that time, and I've done many, I've stood as a candidate in London and various other places, it's always prefaced with something about racism, or you're a racist party, or you're this, that, or the other. And the irony is that I've been married to a woman from the Caribbean for over 17 years. My children are mixed race. On some occasions, when I've been out on the local campaign trail, my wife has been with me, and the mainstream media still will ask me the question about racism. And I say, would you like my wife to answer? Those bits are always cut from the interview, funnily enough, because it doesn't fit the narrative. So it's just, rather than actually have a realistic conversation about immigration, and my wife was an economic migrant. She's a nurse, or she was a nurse, she's now left nursing. She came to this country over 25 years ago, and in her passport it was stamped no recourse to public funds. So she came to work. If she didn't have a job, she would have to go home. And of course, I've found as I've campaigned across London actually that many of what I refer to as the Windrush generation are supportive of UKIP, because many of these people came in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They had a tough time finding work, finding jobs, and they now find that their children are struggling to find accommodation, work and jobs. Yet they see people coming from the European Union who have a right to live, work and claim benefits in this country, and they're frustrated by that. So as I say, I've long distanced myself from the mainstream media. They have an agenda, they have a narrative, and they will try and make their argument fit regardless. And it's those same people that are encouraged to come out and rant and rave at us.
I've tried talking to some, and a few have been very reasonable, but when talking to one very reasonable lady in Weymouth, a minder came up and said, "Oh, don't talk to him. He's been goading and harassing people." And I was discussing like I'm talking to you. So I asked the lady I was talking to, "Do you feel goaded or harassed?" Of course she didn't. But to the crazies on the other side, they believe that, I mean, it's been printed in The Guardian last week, don't talk to right-wingers. It normalises them. Now, that strikes me rather like a certain other figure in the last century's politics who said, like, don't associate with these people because they're not really people.
Yeah. It shows how organised they are, that actually that they have, if you like, training. There's an instruction manual, what to do, how to do it. And as you say, now, because there's been a lot of footage, you know, through various people like YouTubers, Avi Yemen and others, Katie Hopkins, where they are interviewing Remainers and others, asking them, you know, why do they want to remain, what they like about the EU. And of course, none of these people have any arguments, and actually they're looking very stupid. And I think that's the reaction to that is, don't talk to them, particularly as it might end up on YouTube.
One of my most interesting discussions that I've had with a few people, Exeter, Weymouth, Bournemouth, was, what do you think of Mr. Benjamin's personal policy on EU residents staying here after Brexit?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose he wants them kicked out. I said, well, no, actually, he suggested, I don't know about party policy, he said anyone from the EU who's living and working here and wants to stay in Britain gets a passport.
Yep.
Which, and you tell them that, and they don't know what to say. They can't talk to me because I've broken their narrative so completely. They then clam up and go away, can't talk.
Absolutely. It doesn't fit with their agenda. They want us to be the rabid, you know, racist nutters. And of course, if they engage with us and then find out, you know, our backstories and things like that, it just doesn't fit.
But there is another crowd of psychologically damaged people who follow Carl around. And that's the ones standing here today. I can't speak for the rest of you, but I've spoken to several people following him round who are tired of being demonised as Nazis. I don't like being talked to in the street. I won't talk to you because you're a racist. And they say that because I want to engage in a conversation to find out, well, who should I vote for? Do I vote for the Liberal Democrats? I looked into their policies and they've abandoned free speech, so they're no longer liberal. They're opposing the referendum result, so they're no longer democratic. I decided I couldn't vote for them.
Okay, thank you.
But just finish on one note. Brothers and sisters, I have a dream. I have a dream that my grandchildren may grow up in a world where they're judged not for the colour of their blue jokes, but for the character of their political discourse.
Okay, thank you, William.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right, that's right. Cheers, man.
Any other takers?
Anybody else? No, we'll wait for Carl. Are you ready?
Gentleman over there.
Come on then, mate.
Oh.
Pick up. Cheers.
Hello. What's your name?
Nick.
Hello, Nick.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's working, is it? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
working. First question. We've already discussed about one of the first ones we discussed when we came here was about the party affiliation and how UKIP has moved to a new, was it National and Patriots Party, away from the Freedom and Democracy Party.
Well, we've always been an independent party, and you know, patriotism has been at the core of UKIP policies.
That doesn't mean you and UKIP, New Brexit Party don't share common ground. So would you continue to work with the Brexit Party where there are issues where you feel you are in alignment?
I know Nigel very well. I've known him for 20 years, and that means it's impossible to work for Nigel. So Nigel led UKIP for many years, and there's no doubt he played an instrumental part in helping UKIP achieve the referendum. Nigel himself walked away in 2016. He stood down after the referendum before anything was achieved. He genuinely thought we were going to leave, so he moved on to his media career, which he's been doing very well in. And when he realised that actually we could be going back to the European Parliament, he needed a vehicle to get himself elected. Now, he could have come back and led UKIP at any time, but he chose not to. And of course, he's been denigrating the people who voted for him in the past. You know, you're all knuckle draggers and all tattooed and things like that. But these were the very people that probably helped get Nigel elected and put him in that position in the European Parliament. There are many people who have been in UKIP over the years and have fallen foul of Nigel. And the one crime that you can commit in Nigel's eyes, and I'm sure Anne Widdecombe will find herself guilty of this very soon, is to get more publicity than Nigel. All right, that is a hanging offence as far as Nigel's concerned. What I think is actually happening is that the Brexit Party is being used as a stick to beat the Conservative Party with, but it's not the Conservative Party as a whole. It is those MPs that have so far refused to vote for Theresa May's deal. And I think what will happen is that if the Brexit Party do well, and they're bound to get a few MEPs come what may, then what will happen is that there'll be a meeting of the parliamentary party, and they'll say, look, if we have a general election, you'll all lose your seats. You need to vote for my deal. And that is not a deal that we want. So I think they're going to be used to bring about the Brexit none of us actually want.
Right. Second question. You've just mentioned the withdrawal agreement, which, quite honestly, Caligula's horse could have negotiated a better
surrender
deal
document,
yeah. It kind of shows to me that politics is broken, basically. Those that lead aren't listening to those who are being governed. And I keep on feeling that maybe in the past we've been governed constitutionally by a series of norms. And I'm wondering what UKIP's position on is on adopting a codified constitution. I know it's much more domestic than in the election we're campaigning for right now.
We do have a constitution. It's just not in a single document, of course. That's the thing.
And
but
it's governed a lot by convention as well.
But it's the way party politics works that we have a representative democracy. In theory, the people we elect represent us. Unfortunately, the way you get a position within a party is by how loyal you are to that party. So their first interest is to the party, not the people that elect them. And that's the fundamental problem. Also, the two-party state is a tremendous problem, because if you don't like A, you've got to vote for B. So, we've got Jeremy Corbyn, a Marxist, who wants a Venezuela-style government and things like that. So people will vote for the Conservatives just because it's not Labour. And vice versa, because there are many people on the left of the argument who hate the Conservatives for things they've done in the past. So the only way to do it, to get representation back to the people, is to break apart that two-party state. And that's why UKIP is fundamentally different to the Brexit Party. They're there to achieve a single aim, whatever that aim might be, and they will fade away as soon as they try and put together any policies. They've got revolutionary communists, they've got ex-Tories, they've got nobodies. They're never going to work cohesively. And that's why UKIP is such a threat, actually, because it's the electoral threat that UKIP posed at all levels of government. We had assembly members in Wales, we've got assembly members in London, we've got local councillors, we've got MEPs. We did win a couple of MPs occasionally, but it's that threatens them more than anything else, because if we get in, then we can really start to influence things.
Brilliant.
Okay,
thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you. Hello, sir. What's your name?
Clive Guthrie Andrews.
No.
Hi there. I'm a Christian Zionist, and so my question is, does UKIP have a position on Israel?
Not really, I don't think, because we've always said that we've got to sort out our own problems first. We have had in UKIP in the past a UKIP Friends of Israel was a group that existed, so obviously that voice has been heard. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the policy on the Middle East is. I'll be entirely honest. It's not my area of expertise. But obviously, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And obviously, we're a democratic party, so we support democracies. In short, but I can't go into more detail. I'm sorry.
That's what I'd wish to hear from the Labour Party. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome, sir.
Okay, off you go. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lawrence. I really appreciate it. He'll be the guy you're really voting for, because I'm second on the list. He's first, and I am. No, absolutely. It's not about me. It's about the win. We've got to work as a team. Right. I believe I'm answering a question from Tony. Tony, hello. Tony's third on the list.
Thanks very much. I am third on the list.
Yes.
So I look up to him, but the trouble is I've got to go down on my knees to do that.
Yeah,
and I also look up to him over there. Now, I've been a member of the of UKIP for the past 12 years, and I have stood for various candidacies in local elections. I've also stood for Parliament 3 times. What was my reasoning for doing it? I mean, let's be honest, the first time I stood, I didn't have a hope in hell of winning a seat. The poll rating was around 2% at that time. It was great fun. I was able to turn up at hustings, and I was fantastic. I was able to drive in, and suddenly there was a parking space with my name on it. Wow. Second one, I thought, well, let's have a bit of real fun this time. And I stood down in Torbay. I had a good idea, and that was to get my face on some public transport buses. So did that. 16 buses went around Torbay for the period of 5 weeks with my face on the back. And no jokes, please, face like the back end of a bus. It was unnerving. What effect did it have? Well, it meant that I couldn't walk down the street in Torbay without somebody recognising me, getting ready to either throw something at me or come out and tell me they totally agreed with me, or or to say that they were going to vote for me. And did well on that one. Now we've moved on, in my opinion, to a totally different form of advertising, getting out the message. I like all this kit. Works well. I like the fact that somebody's going to take a photograph over there, and I'll probably get a beep on my telephone in about 5 minutes where it'll say, where I'll be able to look at the photograph that's been taken. Somebody else will we've got videos going on here. That video will go onto YouTube. That YouTube will be gone out, and I'll get a telephone call tonight. Hey, Tony, you weren't bad on that. You weren't bad at all. Oh, thank you. Or I'll get some other derogatory comment which I can't possibly repeat in public. Now, my question to Carl is, he's doing this for the first time. Is he barking mad? to actually decide to do a tour of the southwest of England, to go to Exeter, where some bright spark decides that they've got a chocolate milkshake, that it might be a good idea wandering around with a yellow t-shirt on. And I was later told by somebody watching, yes, well, he's a member of Exeter University who is an ardent Liberal Democrat. He goes around being a Liberal Democrat all the time, and there he is throwing a milkshake, chocolate milkshake, at Milo and Carl. And Milo, I think it was, who copped the worst of it.
Yeah, it didn't get me at all.
It didn't get you. Milo, no. Well, you were lucky that Milo is the height that he is, because he was an excellent shield for you.
He was.
And then we go. Was down in Plymouth with you as well, and we go back to the bus, and somebody else has thrown, this time a different coloured milkshake on the against the bus, and with true intelligence, had actually taken a film of herself doing it, and then put that up on YouTube, and that is in effect criminal damage. Whether we're taking any action against it, I don't know, but these are a couple of the incidents I've seen, and a couple, and as the gentleman, one of the gentlemen said earlier on about people standing at Exeter and chanting, we had a photo opportunity there where Carl, myself and Lawrence stood there smiling like loons with the crowd behind us. As soon as we turned our backs, what happened? Racist scum. Thanks a bundle. Are you not prepared to say that to me, to my face? Because I'm not a racist. I'm thinking, as soon as they said that, it was a finger in the air and then depart. So, I get back to my original question. Carl, lovely to meet you again. Lovely to see you here. Why?
Because it has to be done. It just has to be done. We can't allow things to carry on this way. This can't be our public dialogue. I mean, what we're doing is effectively some kind of democratic revolution, and like all revolutionaries, we're going to get pushback from the establishment. We're going to get attacked by the people who are invested in the way things are done at the moment, whether it's financially or morally or politically. But we've got to carry on because we should. I mean, I shouldn't need to have anyone protecting me doing this. I'm really not a very controversial guy. If you actually look at what I want politically,
I've done that.
Yeah, it's not very controversial, is it?
I do not find it controversial at all.
It's in no way objectionable. And so why am I getting attacked by very otherwise fine people who, you know, nice middle class, they pay their taxes, they go to their jobs, they're very well liked in their communities. What is it that is making them radical? You know, making them violent? And it is the media. It's misrepresentation by the media. The media is deliberately coming along. I mean, and literally, imagine this. You're sat there, you're reading the paper, and suddenly here's someone you don't know. You should hate them. That's effectively what the media is doing, and they buy into it. And as soon as I challenge them, they can't tell me what I've said, where I've said it, why I said it, what the context was, and it all just melts away. And you realise that these are just the sort of moral busybodies who feel the need to go over and give you a piece of their mind because they're offended. And that kind of tyranny is the sort of tyranny of political correctness, and it has to stop. We have to be able to have the tough conversations because these problems are growing like a cancer in our society. Like Tommy Robinson doesn't spring out of the ether fully formed. You know, he is the result of a long process of injustice to get to the point where he's at. And we saw yesterday he's being attacked, bricks thrown, eggs thrown, the police cars were smashed. I mean, this is something that just has to be dealt with. And so you've got to take the slings and arrows. You've got to. But we'll keep going. We'll keep going, and we'll go on to the. We'll keep doing these events. In fact, I'll be going around the southwest once a month. I'm going to plan for. So coming up to the local elections next year. So hopefully we can do quite well in the locals. I'm not just going to run away. I'm not just going to quit. You know, we've got to keep going, and I think we should.
Thank you. Thank you. And those comments are really the reason that I'm here, that I am standing, that I continually put my name forward. Continually, over the years I've been shouted at. Over the years I've had things thrown, and thankfully they've missed. But someday, you know, I'm a big enough lump that I'm a big enough target. Somebody's going to get me. But thank you, Carl, because you sum up there the reasons why we want everybody to know the truth. The core of the argument. Now, the core of the argument for me about Europe is somebody mentioned a European police force. One of the main issues with the European Union is that they want a unified police force. At the moment, our police force is not armed. We have an armed section to it, but our police, we've got 3 policemen over there, they're not armed. Whenever you go to France, Germany, all these other countries, the police are armed. In unification, the demand would be that we follow the suit, follow the example of the rest of Europe, and we arm our police. I believe that that is confrontation, and I believe that our police force should operate as they do now by consent. A unified armed forces is another one. Where we should be saying, are we proud of our armed forces? I am intensely proud of our armed forces. I'm sure that everybody here is. But do we want to see a unified armed force where we have Spanish, English, French, German combined as a force? Will it work? I doubt very much it will work. But those are just a couple of the issues. There are plenty more. You've been listening to them. I'll leave you now. Thank you very much for the chance to speak on the mic, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming up.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you. Yep, fantastic. Thank you. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, Carl.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, so my name's Chris.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Just a short one first.
Yes.
The first thing was about the BBC's moralising on jokes. I just remember a joke from, I think it was around 2002, where a Muslim lady called Shazia Mirza, I believe, told the following joke. My name is Shazia Mirza, At least that's what it says on my pilot's license. Now, to me, that sounds like a joke about mass murder. But I think it's a good joke.
That's a very good joke.
Yeah. But
spicy.
But I think if they're, they get the Radio 4 audience laughing at that.
Yes.
And so why can't they laugh at other jokes?
Well, because I'm the one telling them. That's
Yes,
why.
well, exactly.
And I mean, if you actually, I've had lots of people sending me clips from the BBC YouTube channel where, for example, Robert Webb is making a rape joke, where people like Ricky Gervais are making rape jokes, Frankie Boyle, all of these people have been making these kind of saucy jokes for quite some time. I'm actually a huge fan of all the people I'm listing there, and that's where I get my sense of humour from. They're my kind of sense of humour. And I love the fact that the noose of political correctness has become so tight now that they're reining in their own arguments. Like, for example, David Baddiel actually made a very principled argument for the defence of, well, rape jokes. He's backed off on it now. He made it a couple of years ago now saying, well, I mean, I'm not sure I stand by that. And it's like, well, then you're a moral coward, aren't you? Because you stood by it when you wrote it, because you knew that it was the right thing to do, because we should be able to make certain jokes in certain contexts, and that was what he was arguing. And now he's too afraid of the lynch mob on Twitter, isn't he?
Yeah, okay. So the main thing I want to talk about is economics, which I don't think has come up into... Oh, what happened there? That was just my pencil.
There you go, sir.
Thanks. So you one of your question sessions, you were talking about austerity and your unhappiness with the situation. And I think this is part of a much bigger problem, which is the way... I think it's to do with economic theory in general. I think there's actually a big problem with economic theory that... it goes back hundreds of years. So, back to Adam Smith, let's say. Economists spend a lot of time looking at what they call flows, which is things that happen over a period of time, rather than things that existed at a point in time. So, for example, they're looking at the amount of production per year, amount of consumption per year, but they ignore the situation of how much you've got in savings. So if there's a lot of consumption going on, there's two possibilities. One, you're producing a lot, which is good, or two, you're eating into your savings, which is bad. And they don't distinguish between those two.
Right.
And this is, I think, a fundamental problem. In 2008, when during the financial crisis, the government and the central banks, or governments and central banks all around the world, their approach was, we've got to do something to keep the flows up. We've got to keep the amount of economic activity going up. But their approach to that is to try to increase consumption, more debt, consuming without producing, and punish the savers as well. So what this, I'm convinced, leads to is the problems we have with inflation, and inflation in housing particularly. The need to have two incomes in a household now just to make do, and another knock-on effects. Just things like local government not being apparently not able to fill in potholes in the roads and pay for care for the elderly. All these other things that where people are complaining about the lack of funding, but I think that the actual problem is that the costs of everything have gone up. What I'd like to do is actually pass you a paper I've written to have a look at it at some point. It's actually relatively simple, but it uses balance sheets as an economic model, and it's actually really straightforward, because if you think of a balance sheet as you have tangible assets which you own, you have debt assets which are debts owed to you, and liabilities which are what you owe to everybody else. And if you if you take away your liabilities from your assets, that gives you your net worth. And what you find is that net worth is there's a conservation of net worth across almost any economic transaction. So if I go to a shop and buy a book, then I go in with £5 and come out with a book. So let's see. Well, I had £5. They had a book, and then we come out. I've got a book, and they've got £5. So our combined net worth hasn't changed, and neither has anybody else's.
Yes.
And the great thing about this is it scales up to the macroeconomic scale as well, and it's actually really intuitive and straightforward.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, just to be clear, I'm not an economist.
Yeah. Sure.
So I'm by no means an expert on this. I do as much reading as I can because it's important to know as much as you can. But I honestly can't make a judgment on that off the cuff.
Okay.
So
fine.
I'm more than happy to read through it though when I've got some time.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think it does help to explain an awful lot of things, such as quantitative easing, for example. As I say, almost every transaction leaves net worth the same. So if somebody is better off as a result of quantitative easing, that means somebody is equally worse off as a result. That they present it as being good for the economy, but actually it can't be, because as I say, it doesn't affect the overall net worth. It's just accounting entries.
Right. Okay. Well, like I said, unfortunately, I can't make an off-the-cuff judgment, so because I just don't have the expertise for that.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate you bringing me that, and I'll read it on the car ride home. Actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I'm
That'd be
very
lovely.
interested to know what you've written. Because
Yeah,
I'm interested in reading anything really.
Okay.
So
I hope you do find it interesting.
Well,
And
thank you very much
I
for
hope it
coming.
helps to explain.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Well, I tell you, at least it hasn't started raining yet.
You ready to go?
I heard that groan. Right.
Hold it above there and point it in my face.
Wow, you're dressed wonderfully.
Hello.
Hello, lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Chrissy. Pleased to meet you.
Love to meet you, Chrissy.
Thank you for doing this. I'm from Berkshire, so you're not representing me, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view. First question, just because I want to make it nice and simple. What's your opinion on pi?
Pi?
Yeah, either the mathematical concept or the food stuff. I don't really mind.
Well, the mathematical concept, I don't really know what kind of opinion I could have on it, really. I do like pies, but I'm forced to eat salads at the moment.
Well,
so
boo to that.
Yeah, I try not to think about them too much.
Well, let's move on then.
I prefer pasties, actually. I've got
Do
to say.
you?
Oh yeah, I went to college in St Austell, and every day I'd be able to get a pasty, a freshly cooked one. It was amazing.
Oh, that sounds lovely, actually.
Oh, it was. It was great.
Well, I'm from Yorkshire originally, so I love myself a bit of pastry or pie.
Yeah.
Or so.
But it's terribly unhealthy, though. That's the problem.
Well, exercise a lot. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I have for you is, you seem to be incredibly prolific on YouTube and, unfortunately, the bad representation within media. Why do you think nobody else is following your moves in that respect? Because trying to find anything out about what's going on in my local area is next to impossible, whereas finding out what's going on here in the southwest is relatively easy.
I don't know. I think we're in uncharted waters at this point. And I think you have to be a certain kind of person to want to step out of the boundaries that already exist.
I don't know what you mean.
I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean. But that's the thing. I think you've got to be a certain kind of adventurous person to want to break out of the boundaries and see if anything can be done outside of the orthodoxy. And I guess I'm one of those dissidents. But I think most people, this kind of thing wouldn't suit. I mean, the way the media treats people, the media is aware of its own power. It's aware of its own influence. And if you don't have something at your back that will bolster you against that, they'll just crush you completely and very, very quickly. I'm fortunate enough to have something that I can resist them with, but I think that most people aren't in that position, and so I definitely wouldn't recommend most people doing what I do. It's a huge gamble, frankly, but I think we're in times where we are. I think it's necessary for parties like UKIP, parties outside of the establishment status quo, to take gambles. I think that we've got to start actually thinking outside of the box and actually trying to get out and talk to real people in the real world about real things, rather than going through the mediator that is the journalist who's talking to you. Honestly, I don't trust them to report accurately. That's the thing.
Well, I mean, that's been proven true with their reporting on the way that Venezuela is going through all sorts of crises, but they don't mention the sanctions from the US. So I mean, really, it's only been you and Russell Brand who've really gone into political discourse on YouTube in the way that you are. And I get a lot of people asking me on my opinions about you, and I'm like, well, he looks like a solid geezer, an absolute chap, but I don't know, so here I am.
Well, I hope. I mean, that's the great thing about doing all of this live is that, like, I can't edit any of this out, and honestly, I'm too lazy to edit the footage myself. So these guys wouldn't know what to edit out if I wanted something. So I mean, you can all see exactly the kind of character that I have, and if I don't know something, I'll just say I don't know something, like with the previous chap with economics, in fact. There's no point trying to lie to people or, bullshit people or something. I don't want to do that. So I think this is just one of the easiest and probably the best way to actually get a real bead on what the politicians are like. Because, I mean, when you see that the establishment politicians and the way they do things, it's all very stage managed. And I'm sure that everyone's noticed that this is not very stage managed. A lot of crazy things happen, but honestly, it's been great fun as well. It's been really interesting, and it's been a real adventure. And honestly, it's been an amazing privilege to be able to do something like this. And I saw the opportunity. I thought, well, hell, what's the worst that can happen?
Yes. Thank you very much for your critique of Starship Troopers, by the way.
Oh,
it was
my
stunning.
pleasure.
It was stunning. It was really, really
so
good.
Much. That was honestly, I knew it took a long time to do, but it was one of those things where I knew that what they were saying about it just wasn't accurate,
absolutely.
It comes from a far left perspective where they think that any kind of order is inherently wrong, any kind of self-discipline is inherently wrong, and I think that's a very it's a very regressive moral system that they have, in my opinion, because honestly, I mean, for example, it's bad for kids. That's the thing I'm most concerned about. I think children need structure and order. They need,
agree.
To feel secure and to feel like what they're doing is right or wrong, and to know right from wrong. And I think that what the sort of far left moral system at the moment is the abolition of boundaries. And I don't think that's healthy. I think human beings have evolved to require boundaries. Otherwise, they start, frankly, becoming weird. And I don't think it helps their mental health. I don't think it's good for them. And I think that, I mean, gender dysphoria is a mental health problem. And I'm not trying to be harsh when I say that, but I think that the increasing numbers of cases that we see day by day might well be a reflection of the fact that boundaries and order is being broken down. I mean, I don't know, but it's something that I think that is worth investigating. But I'm probably in trouble for just saying that.
Well, not with me.
Well, not with you, but
as somebody who suffers from gender dysphoria, honestly, it doesn't bother me, because without dialogue, how are you supposed to achieve any sort of sensible agreement and
precisely? I mean, I'm not saying
resolution.
I'm right either. I might be wrong, and you could say, well, no, actually, let me explain to you. I don't know.
I think, as with most things, we would probably sit in a point where some of what you're saying is absolutely spot on, and some of it might not be. I definitely agree that boundaries are incredibly important. But I didn't come here to discuss that with you.
No, of course.
MEP, as you hope to be, my thoughts are dwelling on things like energy and water, because the way I see the future is, unfortunately, that water seems to be the issue of the day. There are 16 or 17 states in the US that every year run out of water for
California
drinking.
is a prime example.
Well, yeah, and rather than deal with the problem, they ration the populace rather than, as I say, the problem, which is the waste within an industry, or they like to fire water to damp down desert dust, which obviously isn't productive. We do a lot of energy and water sharing with the European Union. And I was wondering, I mean, on the assumption that you get into being an MEP, and obviously your primary focus is on removing us from the European Union.
Correct.
What are your positions outside of that? Obviously free speech, because it's necessary.
Honestly, all of the sort of things I regularly talk about on my channel are things that I'm going to raise in the European Union, and I'm not going to compromise on these things either. I don't care how many socialists I offend in the process. I'm going to do it regardless. But I mean, really, that's all I can do. All I can do in the European Union. I might be able to propose amendments to things, and I will do if the opportunity arises to protect this country from what they want to do to it. I'll obviously vote for or against any legislation that's in our interest. But really, that's it. That's the limit of my power. So essentially, I'll use it to drive a public dialogue on certain issues that are deeply uncomfortable, that we have to talk about because they're not going away.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. Do you think you will further go into politics once your tenure with the MEP is done, presumably that we have left the European Union after your first term?
I really hope I don't have to. I really hope not.
I mean, I heard an axiom from when I was at college, or uni, or whatever you want to call it, about how those who don't want to be in power probably should be, and those who are in power and want to be probably shouldn't be. Do you think that sums up where you're sitting?
I really just wanted to play video games. I really did. I
Like
really
it.
just wanted to be left alone. You know, but they won't leave us alone. They'll never leave us alone. They've got plans for us all, and I don't really want to be part of their plans. So and now I'm here talking to everyone because something has to be done. And I can't wait until this is all over and finally they'll leave us alone and then we can get back to whatever it is we were doing before.
Bit of Dark Souls, maybe.
A bit of Total War, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, bit of Total War. That's my particular hobby, because I like putting on an audiobook or something and then just playing a game, and it's a nice relaxing afternoon for
Grand
me.
Strategy is great fun.
I love it.
That's
Bit
why I
Paradox
stopped
as well.
playing Stellaris for that very
Oh,
reason.
yeah, Stellaris is great, yeah.
As they say, you put it on in the morning thinking you'll do an hour, and then 4 years have passed and you still haven't moved.
No, that's exactly right. But yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time and for welcoming me up to talk to you. You do seem like a lovely geezer, somebody who would probably do well to go for a pint with. So thank you for your time.
I'll be going for a pint and a meal after this, so if you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome.
Well, I'll have to find out where I can move my car then, 'cause
Right,
I'm
okay.
parked till 5.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you ever
Thank
so
you.
much for your time.
No problems.
Right, yeah, but is there anyone else who'd like to talk? Come on, Oozaloo. Oh, sorry. So just in case anyone, this is a friend of mine from the internet. How you doing, man?
Not bad. How are
Good.
you?
Very well.
This on my mouth, yeah?
Close to your mouth, that's right.
Right. I've never used one of these microphone things before.
Well, you're doing very well so far.
Right, now, Sargon.
Yes.
Pretend that he didn't introduce me, because the first joke is,
Sorry.
you don't know me and I don't know you. But there's this MP who has a bit of a bone to pick with you.
Is there?
Now, what is your policy on raping MPs? Because I know you've never been asked this before. I'm being very new here. What is your policy?
I wouldn't even, actually.
Now, see, there's only one problem with that. Only one. Everyone that says there's a different problem is completely wrong. The only problem with that is the implication that she's not beautiful, which is, of course, completely ridiculous.
I don't even think anyone would say that. I mean, how dare they? How dare they imply that might be the case?
Exactly. To say that a woman isn't beautiful...
It's basically a hate crime.
Basically. I mean, not even basically. It might as well be a hate crime. She's making the laws.
Yeah, at the rate we're going, it will be a hate crime.
She doesn't have any power, so she'll make the laws to make sure you can't say that.
Unironically, the Nottinghamshire police are trying to treat misogyny as a hate crime. It's like, well, who the hell defines what that is?
The victim.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, in fact, yeah. The victim, yes.
I'm surprised that there aren't half of men in the county in prison. Probably the only reason is because we live in a somewhat high-trust society still.
It's only a matter of time, though.
Yeah. Now, I had some other brilliant troll questions that have all completely evaporated from my mind. Okay, well, let's go for a serious question then.
Yes.
I did a video yesterday on the rape definition in this country. You'll probably know what I'm going at with this.
Could you let everyone know what it is?
Well, the issue with the rape definition in the UK is that only a man can be a rapist in this country. If a woman forcefully envelops a man with any part of his body in any way, she is only a sexual assaulter at worst.
Right.
And if we're doing this equality thing, shall we do it properly?
Well, I agree. Why should it be a gendered question?
Indeed.
You know?
And the government responded to a petition by a friend of Discordia and said essentially that there was widespread agreement among the parliament that should be the definition, that it should be gender biased. So it's not something that just slipped through. They agree that it should only be men that can rape legally in this country.
Why?
Good question. I think, honestly, it's probably etymological at its root. It's probably just traditional. It's probably what they think of when they think of rape. But it might be a social justice definition. It might be that they think that only someone with power can rape.
Well, there are definitely going to be some people who think that, but I think that there are also, like you say, there are going to be people who have traditionally inherited that's the standard mindset.
Yes.
Because I mean, like when you look at domestic violence, like the Duluth model, it's to default treat the man as the abuser, even though 40% of domestic violence in this country is done by women to men.
Yes.
So,
and of course, all those male rape victims had loads of power to exert over the women that had held knives to their necks, tied them up to the bed, date raped them, etc. Loads of power to exert.
Yes.
So, what is UKIP's policy on changing that definition?
I don't think they actually have an official policy on the definition, but I think that if you were to ask them, they'd probably be a lot more fair-minded and say, no, a rape victim is a rape victim. It doesn't matter what their gender is.
So UKIP is pro-equality communists, then?
Essentially. No, I think they are pro-equality, but I think that's a kind of common sense equality, you know, where you're not making a distinction between a man and a woman, where an unnecessary distinction needs to be made.
Indeed.
You know, there's no need.
Right, let's think of something else to bring up. Damn it, I've forgotten all of them.
You should have written these down.
I should have written them down, shouldn't I? I didn't want to be consulting notes. Instead, I just wanted to be sitting here forgetting everything. How can you account for the death of D&D?
So, for anyone who doesn't know what Oozly means here, we played Dungeons and Dragons. Right, you're fired. No, we played Dungeons and Dragons, and it was quite popular. We get like 30,000 people a week watching our game of Dungeons and Dragons. But I had to give that up to come and do this. So that's how I account for it.
Yeah, well, Arch is supplanting you as DM.
Well, no. When the campaign's over, I will be playing in his campaign.
Fair enough. There was another one I just had, but I've forgotten it again. See, when I do videos, I take a long time to say a line, and then I wait and take a long time to say the next line. But when I'm in person, that doesn't really apply.
Yeah, honestly, one thing I've learned is it's very easy to make you to edit yourself to sound very fluid.
Thank you.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. But as soon as you're in the public and you can't do that, you've got to be quite quick off the mark.
Yeah, I'd far rather be answering the questions than asking them.
Honestly, it's much easier. So, Oozly, what do you think UKIP could do to change the world for the better? What would you think they should focus on?
Well, it's a big question, and I've been thinking recently more and more that not exactly the denialist position that nothing can be changed, but that the country is going to get to rock bottom before it starts sweeping back up gradually, that we're going to have to see some degree of systemic collapse. And perhaps, this leads me on to what I just remembered was another thing I was going to mention, perhaps that comes in the form of rebel parties stealing members from existing parties, such as the Brexit Party. I don't know if you talked about this today or much recently, but what is your take on them being so high in the polls and UKIP being so low relatively?
I think the polling is not necessarily accurate. It wasn't accurate for Trump, it wasn't accurate for Brexit. And
or for the new Australian Prime Minister.
Or for the Australian Prime Minister, yeah, exactly. Because the polling is done... the internet polling, I think, is the cancer of the modern age, actually, for politics, because it's done by self-selection. So it's people who are interested in doing it, sign up, and then my wife does this, for example. I didn't know how YouGov polls were done. They're done by email. So you have to go and sign up, and then they'll email you questions, and then you just pick and choose whichever ones you want.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a reflective result of people who are just wandering around enjoying their lives. You know, pollsters should be on the streets and asking people questions rather than relying on self-selected emails. I mean, this is why the 1 in 5 statistic of sexual assault in universities is so misleading and was disavowed by the people who did the damn study, because it was self-selection.
Yeah,
so you got people who want to go and do it, which means that they're more likely to not be representative of the wider public. And yet this is a statistic that's bandied about all the time. And so, yeah, exactly. I don't know if we can actually trust the polls. I guess we'll see come May the 23rd. And on that note, vote Sargon. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank God.
Right, so I probably shouldn't have said anything about the weather because it looks like it's turning. That's a lesson learned for me. What time is it? How much longer have we got?
It's 3:15.
Right. So we'll carry on as long as it's not raining, I figure, if that's all right with everyone.
Hello, I'm Alan.
Hi, nice to meet you, Alan. How you doing?
Nice to meet you too. Just a very quick question. I wanted a bit of clarity on one issue. I do think the whole issue around Joe Phillips has been a bit of a smokescreen in terms of it's distracted attention from the key issue, which is freedom of speech.
Yes.
I think if you'd changed the wording slightly, it might have had a very different. If you just said I wouldn't.
Well,
so it's an omission. You've given a statement of omission. and it's now being co-opted by the media as if you'd said that you would.
Well, that's true.
Which is a complete inversion.
Well, yeah, but the reason that I worded the tweet that way is because, I mean, they already had me blocked, so they weren't going to see it anyway. And I was very concerned about the Reclaim the Internet campaign. I really was. I mean, Ella Whelan of Spite, who does fantastic work, described it as an Orwellian way of controlling the internet by promoting free speech, by restricting it, and essentially they were trying to co-opt the fight in the name of would result in censorship. And so I needed to do something that I knew would get their attention. And if I said I wouldn't, then they probably just ignored it and carried on. So I had to do something offensive to make sure they'd pay attention, and they did. I mean, it made news headlines at the time, you know. So I
think I understand the principle of what you were doing. I think it's just a pity that we are facing an issue with freedom of speech right now.
Yes.
I think just the fact I just met somebody and we said we were going to come here just to have a chat with yourself, to have some debate, and it was almost like a verboten thing. It was like, you know, I haven't given an indication of my politics.
Yeah.
I'm here to have a discussion. So just the fact that people feel there's some sort of anxiety around having a debate is an issue. I think that is a big problem. My concern and my only issue that I wanted to approach you was actually none of these subjects. It was something I saw online, a debate I think you did in New York.
Right.
And once again, it could have been a sentence that was taken out of context. It was regarding the Holocaust, and you basically said, "I don't give a shit." Now, as somebody who's half Jewish, obviously that is something that I take exception to. Have you got any statements that you want to clarify on that, because you're saying that the Jews were basically playing identity politics? Personally speaking, I have never seen them using that to get.
Well, so Count Dankula was actually this is the crux. It's Jewish identity politics that landed him with a conviction and a fine. It was offence over a particular style of joke. I mean, the Holocaust just doesn't factor into my political analysis of going forward, because I don't think we're in the same circumstance where the same thing can happen. Now, I mean, one of the things I find frustrating is Holocaust deniers, because the situation with the Nazis is actually crystal clear. You can go through the philosophy, you can go through the rhetoric, you can go through the state action that they were targeting. We've got the evidence. It's all there. It's all laid out, and it's an absolute tragedy, obviously. But when it comes to political factors and calculations and analysing politics now, it's not really very relevant. We're not in that time. You know, I don't believe that we're going to see anything of the sort happen at any point in the future.
Well, no, you've spoken in the past about issues like grooming gangs. I think, and it was an independent think tank registered anti-Semitic attacks as being on the rise.
Oh, really?
So given that you'd previously spoken about male suicide being, this was the whole thing that kicked off. I mean, I agreed with you on that. I think Joe Phillips sort of snorting with derision at that is insulting. It's our age group that are killing themselves in record numbers, and we need to know why. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. That is independent.
I'm totally obviously I'm totally against anti-Semitism. I'm an individualist, so obviously any kind of group judgments are totally unjust, and it's just bigotry, obviously. But I think it would be dishonest to say that there wasn't an identitarian lobby for Jewish people. I think there is. I mean, and the Holocaust is used as a way of shutting down what was otherwise legitimate criticism. And now I'm not saying every Jewish person does that, because I know they don't. Like yourself. And there's another chap over there who's a Jew who doesn't do that either. This isn't this, and I don't even think it's that widespread amongst Jewish communities. But I think there are, and usually it's left-wing activists who are doing this, using this kind of identitarianism. And so I'm not going to concern myself with the events of the Holocaust when going forward discussing politics, because it's just not relevant to the things that we're discussing unless we're actually talking to Nazis.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying. I think my point was basically that the greatest tragedy of history is that we don't learn from it. So to take your point and say, well, it's not something that is immediately an issue, I don't see it. I think an increase, as soon as you start marginalising certain groups, as soon as you start saying, I mean, for example, in that talk, the thing that concerned me was a sort of statement along the lines of, Jews tend to be very upwardly mobile and occupying the. I mean, that is a generalisation in the same way as you say, black people are very good athletically. You wouldn't accept that as
that's actually not just a generalisation. That's statistically demonstrable. Jewish people are very successful, and rightly so. And this is one of the things that kind of frustrates me, because they are actually one of a really good barometer of whether we have a free and open and tolerant society, because Jewish people tend to have very strong family values. They tend to be very education oriented, and they tend to be very hard workers. And so if people who follow those patterns of behavior don't succeed in society, they're being held down. You know, there's something, there is an actual institutional barrier in the way, or a social barrier in the way, but we don't see that. But by the other token, we have to be able to criticize certain people, some of whom are Jewish, and some of whom then say, well, this is, you know, the Holocaust, and they'll deflect onto that. And I'm sorry, it's excuse making, in my opinion, a lot of the time. You know, because we're not in the same situation. And honestly, I spoke to a friend of mine called Rucker Ali about this. He's also Jewish, and we were in a car journey, and I was like, look, why do you talk about it so much? He's like, well, it's something that happened in the past. I said, yeah, but how does it factor into your situation now? And he was just like, I hadn't thought about that way. And so I look at it as kind of a thing that hangs over the community rather than helps them. For me, if that were me, I wouldn't want something terrible that had happened to the English to be hanging over my head now. I would consider that to be a bit of like a thing that was holding me back, you know? I don't know exactly if I'm describing this right, but that's how I view it. And I see it as disempowering. You know,
I think if you're using as not an excuse, as a symptom for anything that is negative in your life, then I agree.
Yes.
But obviously, coming from I'm not Jewish by faith, but from an area.
Sure,
you know, I've never seen that, never experienced that, never seen people who use that as a kind of charge against people. I think that it's I think we just have to take ourselves away from the fact that it's Jewish people. It's 6 million people, well, more. Dead.
Yes.
And I think that's what we've got to learn from. It's not just saying, well, it's identitarian.
Totally agree.
You know, and I think that is the way forward. But no, I mean, I took the things I took just, I mean, there's a lot. I agree with you more on issues, but I wanted to talk about the one that I didn't.
Yeah, because let me explain. Because the thing is, again, a lot of this comes from the sort of like the atmosphere of a comedy club, you know, where you're saying things that you mean, but you might be saying them in a particularly coarse way for entertainment value, and that's how that statement came out. But I totally stand by what I'm trying to say when I say that. You know, it's like it is. I mean, not. And again, like you say, you don't see that, and that's fantastic. You know, because that means that it's a small number of activists who are doing this. But I think that there are some activists who do this and use it as a kind of excuse why they don't have to take criticism. You know, and it never starts there. You have to drill down to it essentially. But like I said, I view it as kind of a burden, you know, and I appreciate it. It's a horrific thing to have happened, obviously, and it's one of those things that, as you say, we have to learn from history, and I think that we have, you know, and so I think that it's one of those things that we don't need to actually keep bringing up when we have any kind of discussions about anything, really, and so that's genuinely how I feel.
No, I see what you're saying. The only, like I said, on the basis of freedom of speech and a lot of the issues that you discuss, I have more in common with your views than I don't, but I wanted to raise obviously ones that were open to debate rather than there's no point just operating in an echo chamber.
Oh, of course.
The thing that kind of conflicted with that view, and I see what you're saying. You're saying, well, you've got to draw a line, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think we need to learn from the past. Doesn't mean you constantly drag it out, but you say, well, hold on a second. We've got a situation in society. We're marginalising certain people. We're saying certain people are lesser or better.
Yeah, we need. I don't like any of that kind of rhetoric. Like I said, I'm an individualist. Yeah. You know, we don't. You know, I don't care about the groups at all. To be honest. So yeah.
But then you see, if you go back to the Joe Phillips thing, you were like, well, hold on a second. You're disenfranchising and being derisory about an incident of people killing themselves. So whether they're Jewish or whether they're white males between 45 and 49, that's what I'm saying. Is that I just thought that I felt there was a line of hypocrisy there where you're saying, hold on a second, you can't say you are just kind of playing that off and go, who cares about white males killing themselves? But at the same time, looking at another YouTube clip, you're saying, who gives a shit about the Holocaust? And that was where I was like, well, that's also
it was in the context of people using it as a smokescreen, you know, as a defense against legitimate criticism. But I mean, you know, if I were to make a wider thesis around it, well, of course, you know, you have to learn from history, obviously, and it is genuinely important. Like the dangers of collectivism actually are very, very highlighted with the fact that it results in something like the Holocaust, and so. You're completely correct in the sort of moral and philosophical analysis there, but that wasn't what I was talking about. I was you know, we were talking about a specific Jewish person who was actually trying to avoid criticism by, you know, saying, "Oh, I'm Jewish, you can't criticize me," and all this sort of stuff. And so I hope that explains what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted a bit of clarity.
I appreciate that. When you take things online, offline, they sound a lot more coarse than they were actually sort of received in, you know. at the time. But it's just one of those things, because it's like the atmosphere of like a club of lads, you know, who are like getting together and having a laugh, you know. But no, I stand by the sentiment behind it, but obviously I probably should have worded it better. But then I never thought I was going to go into politics. So there's going to be a million things like this where I've been joking around and having fun. But I mean, there's serious conviction behind it, but the delivery is not for daytime consumption, you know.
No, I think that's why I thought it was a good opportunity to discuss it, rather than, and this is the whole problem I think that we're having with the media right now, is that I saw that and I thought, you know, there's a lot of things that I feel an affinity with or an agreement with, and this stuck. So I thought, well, I've got the opportunity. You know, I live in Salisbury, come down, actually have the conversation face to face. And the problem with the media is that, and also other members of society, is that they'd rather just be stood, you know, with a balaclava at the background, shouting abuse.
Yes.
Whereas the opportunity's here, you know, and I think
to actually hold me to account.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's something, you know, irrespective of what people feel of your politics, that is something that we're not seeing now. Everybody wants to operate in an echo chamber. You just look at Clinton in the election. She wanted to just spend the time in New York with her liberal elite. And what happened? You know, that she wasn't speaking to the majority of the country. So I think I welcome that. And it was a good opportunity to, you know, you have clarified your position. Don't necessarily agree with it, but you've made it clear.
Absolutely. And the thing is, if I was at a computer or something, I'd be able to show you examples of what I mean, because it's not a universal thing, you know. And I think I'm fairly clear when I say, you know, I don't like judging groups. I like to talk to individuals about what they personally do, because then that's actually fair, you know. And I could show you examples of where this has happened, and I could say, well, look, I think that's inappropriate, and I think sometimes it is a form of identity politics. And it's one of those things that I'm just against. I don't like identity politics. But then, like I say, I meet loads of Jewish people who are like, yeah, I hate identity politics. You know, I think we should be individualistic as well. So honestly, thank you so much for coming out and
not at all. Thank you for clarifying that.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. How's it going? What's your name, sorry?
I'm Lily.
Lily, nice to meet you, Lily. I'm Carl.
Okay, so my question to you is, so I've given this a lot of thought. It seems today, especially my generation, people are really, really divided, especially over, like you were saying, with identity politics, and through racial issues and political issues. So with this division has come a loss of community. People can't seem to agree on anything. And my question to you is, do you think there's perhaps an overall agenda by maybe the people who are pushing this narrative for division? For example, in the media, we're being told to not... trying to think of a way to say this properly. So, for example, in the media, we are told not to discuss things properly. We are told these people are bad, these people are good. It's very black and white, and you know, this whole narrative is kind of quite primitive.
That's a great way of describing it. Primitive,
in terms of how to have a good discourse and for peaceful agreement, that seems to go out the window now. And I wondered, is there like an overall maybe agenda which is going to come out of all of this confusion? If I were
that's a good question. I think that's a very good question. I think that the people who push identity politics don't really know where it leads, and I think that they think fairly short term, and I think that they think in the short term, well, if Group A and Group B have a difference between them, then we could reduce the influence of Group B to level them out with Group A, and that solves the problem of them not being exactly the same, which they would call equal. That's not how I would define being equal, but I would define being equal as in the way that you're treated, you know, the way the state treats you, for example. So for me, it's equal opportunity. You know, it shouldn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or black or white or whatever it is. You know, when you're going for a job, it should be what's on your CV, for example, you know. But at the BBC, they actually do care about your race. So I very much think that they think in the short term, and they think that that's morally justified in the short term. But I think that leads on to long-term consequences, especially when you start adding in things like hate speech laws to protect the hypothetical feelings of the group at large, even if individuals in that group don't share that opinion at all. You know, it doesn't really matter because you defined black people, say, as being responsive to the N-word. And so, I mean, I know lots of black people like, I don't care, you know, it's just a word to me. But they don't matter because you've predefined black people as being responsive to this word. And like with the chap asking me about the Holocaust, you know, Jewish people, oh, they must care about the Holocaust because they're Jewish. And so a lot of them don't, you know, a lot of them think it's a piece of history, you know, but they get ignored because it's a predefined narrative around a certain group. And what this ends up doing is effectively turning these groups into armed camps where you've got a specific delineated barrier between them and everyone else. And if anyone crosses this barrier by saying something, it's like firing a shot at the camp or something, then they have to respond in kind. And then that means, oh, well, if we've got another group for black people, now they've got their own barrier and you're not allowed to enter this. And you end up sort of separating society up into these ideological camps where they're all looking at each other with their ideological weapons like, I'll get you if you get me, you know. And so it seems to me that it's fostering a kind of a hostile society where people don't really take the time to actually know each other. They take the time to know the narrative that they should have about that person rather than actually knowing what that person thinks. And so it strikes me that this is going to create a more divided society and it's going to create a more hostile society. And eventually, and this is the thing that truly worries me, it's actually going to lead to the mass adoption of white identity politics. And I think that would be a terribly bad thing because, I mean, all identity politics are bad, but when the dominant majority group, like Adam was saying earlier about South Africa, when the dominant majority group starts adopting identity politics of their own, they start victimizing minority groups because they actually have the power to do it. And that's really bad. That's how you end up with the Holocaust. That's how that happened. Because the Nazis were German identity politics. And we can say white, but it was specifically German identity politics. And if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler specifically says when he was in the village in which he grew up, there were Jews there, but they looked like him because they were, you know, just, I guess, you know, they'd been there for a long time, so they just looked like, so he couldn't tell them apart. But when he went to Vienna, he saw, like, I think it's Hasidic Jews, where they look ethnically different. They've got much more Middle Eastern origin. And because he was a racialist, he was an identitarian in that way, he looked at them, he wasn't thinking, oh, is this a Jew? He was thinking, is this a German? And because he's a German identitarian, he was like, right, well, they're not Germans, even though they might have considered themselves. Sorry?
Just because they didn't look German.
Exactly. That's exactly what he says in Mein Kampf. Yeah. And so I find this to be a particularly pernicious form of politics because then when a leader comes along that puts this mind in the idea in the mind of the dominant ethnic majority, it becomes acceptable to victimize the minority. And that's how you end up with something like the Holocaust. And so I'm genuinely scared that if they set the table effectively and say, right, every minority group gets to play identity politics, and then the majority have just got to suck it, they don't get any kind of recourse on this issue, then why wouldn't they just say, you know what, no, we're going to play identity politics too, and that's going to suck for you guys. And I'm genuinely afraid of that happening. I don't think it's going to be tomorrow or anything like that, but at some point in the future, if these kind of, I guess they're kind of ideological attacks on the sort of individualist majority. If these carry on, I don't see why they wouldn't end up playing identity politics in their own turn, and that's when it gets gross. That's when it gets really grim, and that's where you get like a Nazi Germany or South Africa sort of situation. And I really want to avoid that. I'm really scared of that. And I don't think that the people who are pushing identity politics, I think they've got a very short-term view of what's happening and think, oh, well, we've made something good in the short term, at least their conception of what is good. But they don't consider the long-term damage it's going to do. And I think that there is long-term damage, and I'm scared of it. I won't lie.
But the people who push identity politics are quite often... So, for example, at my university, the people who push identity politics are quite obviously manipulated by the media. So why would so if we didn't want like some sort of Holocaust kind of outcome, why is the media still pushing this? It's almost like a sort of divide and conquer kind of scenario. Because out of this, like you say, there will be complete chaos. Yep. What's to stop maybe a higher power stepping in and just completely?
Well, I don't think they I don't think they think about the long-term effect of what they're doing.
My question was more like who benefits? Because
certainly
somebody,
them.
Yeah,
certainly the media, certainly the
because the average person who
is
is pushing identity politics might not realise of the long-term effects.
Absolutely,
but the people in power will.
Well, I'm not sure. That's the thing. I've spoken to journalists who do this. I've spoken to academics, and I think that generally it comes from the fact that they're very left-wing, and that their highest ideal seems to be equality at all costs. For me, equality is, I mean, it's a false god. It doesn't exist. You know, no two people are ever really equals. Everyone's different, and that's why we need liberty instead. The closest we can ever come to that is political equality: one man or woman and one vote. You know, and that's a safeguard against tyranny. That's not even. If it wasn't necessary for liberty, political equality wouldn't be useful. You know, if we could be free without being political equals, then we would do it, and we just wouldn't care, because, you know, why would it matter? But I think that that's a safeguard against tyranny in order to protect our liberty, and that's why we do that. And honestly, I genuinely think they just don't know this, or they just don't think about it. I don't want to ascribe sort of this kind of this kind of attitude to them, because I'd like to be charitable. You know, I don't know every single one of them, but the ones I've talked to seem more ignorant than malevolent to me. But that could just be like with Katie McCann. When I spoke to her off camera, she was, you know, very interrogatory, and same with Victoria Derbyshire. She's very, you know, very interrogatory in the interview, but afterwards they were completely normal and nice. So I don't know really. I mean, they just seem ignorant to me.
Do you think it's also because people have more of an emotional connection to their beliefs, so it becomes more of an emotive thing, not a logical thing?
That's entirely possible, and that's definitely the case. You know, I mean, that's why this tweet keeps coming up, because they're emotionally triggered by it.
Yeah.
You know, they're not really thinking about it, 'cause it's like, okay, yeah, it's a dick tweet, but come on, you know, it's just a tweet. You know, and he was obviously saying it to be a dick. Don't give him what he wants. You know, but that was the thing. I kind of knew they would not be able to resist the bait.
Oh, that was another thing I was going to ask you about. Actually, was the tweet. I mean, I know everyone asks you about this,
that's fine.
but
it's the world's most famous tweet at this point.
I know. I mean, I obviously don't give a shit. I'm just like, I don't care.
It's a tweet.
But don't you think perhaps you've shot yourself in the foot a little bit? Because obviously now, I mean, I've actually listened to your channel for a whole long time. I was sort of introduced to it quite recently. But one of the most famous things about you now is this tweet. And would you like to be known as the person who wrote this stupid tweet, other than your other work, which is really great?
Well,
and this is what people know you for now. This is kind of how I found out about you, which, I mean...
the thing is, it was 3 years ago, and at the time... there was no way we could get them to react, because the problem we had is that we had no institutional power. You know, no one in the institutions was on our side. They would never give us a platform. They wouldn't listen to us. They wouldn't talk to us. They would just block us on sight, you know. But we had principled opposition to what they were doing, and we needed to find a way to make them accept that there was at least an opposition. So getting them to write an article about this tweet, I mean, okay, it's not ideal, but at least now we are a thing in the public dialogue where, you know, they might be like, oh, these people are evil or something, but at least they recognised that we even existed. And that was the problem that we're having in 2016. Obviously now it's not a problem. But in 2016, it was a problem, and things were different. You know, the environment was different. But no, I'm not. I don't regret it or anything like that. You know, back then, if I knew what I know now, I'd probably still do it, because at least I'd have a way of getting them to legitimize us, to say, okay, well, there's someone on the other side of the argument and they're bad people. Well, okay, that's your opinion. Of course that's your opinion, but we might think the same as you, so, you know, who knows?
Yeah, but I suppose if you're trying to get more people to listen to you and to be honest with
you, to be honest with you, I never expected to go into politics.
No.
So for me, I was just an internet activist. I thought, well, at least they recognize, you know, we're watching, you know.
Yeah.
But I never thought I was going to go into politics.
So you didn't realise how much it would blow up? And
I didn't think it would be as exciting as it is. They're very bothered by it, you know. And it's like, it's a tweet. It's a tweet. You know, they treat Twitter as if it's an important platform, and I don't think it is. I think that you know, the vast majority of the world never use Twitter. You know, and like it's a small number of people really in the grand scheme of things that use Twitter, and I think it's I think honestly Twitter itself as a platform is doing damage to the political and media classes of the West. I think it's turning them kind of weird. You know, they put so much stock in things that literally don't matter, and you know, I think it's hurting them more than it hurts anyone else.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for coming up.
All right,
really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll take it. Right. Hello.
You're cold, yes?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Appreciate that.
want to finish early as well because it is going to Right, I was planning on finishing at 4.
Okay, folks. So we'll do one more person if that's okay, and because it's getting a little bit chilly, and then we'll just go to the pub and get an early dinner or something if that's cool with everyone. Right. Hello.
Evan.
Evan, nice to meet you, Evan.
Right, I'm here for a couple of reasons. Mainly, I'm here to represent some people who didn't have the chance to come down here today, so I've got a couple of questions that they wanted to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
First thing is,
little
naturally,
bit closer.
Oh, sorry. God, I'm a media student. I should know these things. A lot of people, naturally, they're constantly going on about your tweet, your joke, essentially. I actually want to have a word with you about this, specifically when it comes to humour and the censorship of people with what could best be described as darker humour. And
that's racist.
Is it? The thing is, I've had a lot of people have a go at me, say I'm a white supremacist, I'm a racist, I'm an alt-righter, simply because of the jokes I make. And then I come out and say, hi, I'm an Irish immigrant who raised by a single mother who recently dated a transgender man. And they just, like, they blue screen. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're just like, wait, but you're meant to be one of us. It's like, but I'm not.
No.
That's the point.
Well, that's the problem with identity politics,
Yes,
isn't it?
I
They
have
claim you.
Yeah, I have the audacity to want to have a conversation with people.
Yeah.
Just the gall of me.
You absolute rebel.
And one of the main things I want to talk to you about is simply because I suffer quite badly from depression, and this isn't self-diagnosed depression like so many people are. The only reason I'm standing here today is because I am up to my eyeballs on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And essentially, I wanted to just say that in the times before I moved on and actually got onto my antidepressants to help me, my way of dealing with it was dark jokes, was dark comedy. And I've had so many people, like, I remember one time when I was in college, I cracked a joke with some of my friends in the middle of the canteen, and this girl about 20 feet away gets up, storms over, and just starts yelling at me, how dare you say that? How dare you talk about people who grew up in a single-parent household? It's like, yeah, I'm one of them. If I can't poke fun of myself, who can I laugh at?
Yes.
What can I laugh at? And it's just...
Well, I think that's an amazingly good way of phrasing this, right? Because one of the things that I had pointed out to me by several people actually is like, who is actually harmed by a joke that's say a racist joke? Who's actually harmed by that? And it always comes back to the person who tells it, and it's always a joke at your own expense when you're telling a dark joke, because the implicit assumption in any kind of dark humor is that it's unacceptable. That's the point. That's why you're doing it. In fact, that's what makes it shocking and funny. You know, that's what makes it surprising. Humor always comes from surprise. So that's what makes it shocking and funny. And the recipient of the negative energy that is generated by this joke is always the person who tells it. It's always the person who tells it. And that's a way of dealing with it, is just to get these issues out. And it's actually because then you have a discussion with that lady who comes and, oh, how dare you, sir? Well, you can say, well, look, this is actually something that is personal to me, is a part of me, and I'm going to deal with it and accept it and then, you know, make it normal by talking about it. And one of the ways to handle that is by humor.
Yeah. Just it's normalizing something that a lot of people they'd never want to talk about it. Yeah. But nowadays it's just like, yeah, crack it. It's a joke. Yeah. Have fun. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, it's not that bad, you know.
Yeah, to be honest, I was like when I started making a lot of the friends I had in college back when they didn't know me too well, I was constantly cracking jokes about, oh yeah, my dad left, still waiting for that Mars bar, stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I've been waiting 20 bloody years for it. Yeah. You're still not back. The line at the shops must be mental. Stuff like that. And they'd always... Thank you.
You've got a career ahead of you, man.
It's the fact that they're constant, like... When I was first kind of just starting to become friends with them, they would always be giving me crazy side glances, just like, are you sure you're meant to be going to it? It's like, well, he hasn't. It's a joke about me.
Yes.
It's like, this is the point.
Yes. You've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it. That's exactly how I feel about it.
Another thing I wanted to talk about is how so many people, specifically on the left, love to target people who don't agree with them as you are the far right, you're the alt-right. There was actually a study done, I believe, a couple of years ago that they took a poll from 1994 and a poll from 2017 to show like how much has the views changed.
Right.
People who like this was from the University of Missouri, so
Right.
it's an American one.
Yes.
They took polls and they showed that Republicans had moved very slightly to the right, only about, I think it was like less than 5%, whereas people on the Democratic left had moved almost 55%.
Blimey.
So they had moved so much of space. So, and the way they were describing is the reason they say, oh, you must be far right because you're so far over there, they don't realize they're the ones moving further and further away.
Yeah,
so
isn't
they don't realize they're the radicals.
When you're so far to the left, the centre looks like the far right to you.
One of the guys who was talking about it, a guy called Tim Pool.
Yep.
He was just saying, like, if JFK was back in these days, they'd be calling him a Nazi.
Oh, well, this is the thing about Donald Trump. If you look at Donald Trump's policies, they're essentially Bill Clinton's policies from back in the 90s. It's just that things have shifted so far to the left that Bill Clinton would now be a Republican right-winger, build a wall, you know, all this sort of stuff. I mean, that was everything that he was saying. So it's madness how the left is. It's really reaching the sort of logical conclusion of its own axioms, I would say.
Yeah.
It's quite terrible, really.
The question I was meant to ask for someone else is, this is from a lady who she's described herself as a lifelong liberal Democrat, but because of the referendum that happened, she feels betrayed by a lot of the people who are meant to be representing her.
Right.
And she was just saying that she can't trust anyone. It feels like she cannot trust anyone that she's meant to be voting for.
Right.
And it was that she realizes, like, now she did vote Remain, but now she has changed her mind. She has changed her opinion. She wants the UK to leave Europe, or leave the European Union, I should say. We're still technically
Well, let's
part of
push
Europe.
ourselves out into the Atlantic a bit. Maybe we get nicer weather.
Cut us off, slowly drift out into the
maybe a
ocean.
little bit south, so sort of, just
get nicer weather.
Yeah, mid-France area, I think would be good.
But she was just saying, because she's been looking into a lot of the new political parties that have been either been growing or have popped up in the time between the referendum, and she wanted to know, when it comes to getting as much change as possible to actually have the referendum fulfilled, she wanted to know who would she vote for to more represent her. Would it be Nigel Farage's new Brexit party or with the UKIP party? Because she doesn't know.
Well, really, on the issue of Brexit, UKIP and Nigel Farage's party are singing from the same hymn sheet, and it's not surprising given how he was the leader of UKIP. We want to get out of the European Union with no deal, no further ties, as soon as possible. So really, I don't think you can actually make your decision on the two between those issues. I mean,
they're so similar in a lot of ways.
But the Brexit party has got a manifesto. I don't think it will produce a manifesto, and I don't think it's going to do anything other than Brexit, whereas UKIP will do that and fight for free speech, fight against identity politics, fight against political correctness, and a whole swathe of other issues, defend the NHS, reduce immigration. There are loads of things that UKIP also want to do other than Brexit. They're not just a one-issue party.
Yes.
That's why I'm sticking with UKIP, frankly.
Okay, and my final question, which actually, thanks to someone else who came up before me and asked the question, I absolutely loved the video you made on Starship Troopers, and I was just wondering, can we expect you to cover Joel Hilderman's The Forever War at any point? Because it is quite similar.
Oh, I haven't read it.
I highly recommend it. Very good book.
The next one, spoiler, the next one is actually going to be Demolition Man.
Oh, okay, very good.
Because the society that they live in is very similar to the one we're moving into now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how I'm really understanding what Edgar Friendly was going through. I have to say, So I've got that in the works, and as soon as the campaig's over, I'll get cracking on it.
Yeah,
it's going to be a good one.
I do highly recommend The Forever War because it deals with a lot of the same similar points as the actual book of Starship Troopers, and it was written by a friend of the author of it, Heinlein. So because of the fact they both agreed on a lot of points and disagreed on a lot of points, so you can definitely see the similarities. And I think, I think you'd be able to make a very good video out of it.
Right, well, I'll check that out. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Really appreciate it. Cheers. Thank you. Right. So, thank you very much, everyone, for coming down and listening to what we have to say. I really appreciate it. If we know where we're going to go, I'll tell you. Let me... Deacon. Right. Right, so we're going to go to a place called The Deacon. You guys familiar with it? Oh, excellent. Right, you can lead the way then. Yeah, so we're going to go down there, have drinks, have food, and carry on just having chats in somewhere a little bit warmer than it's become out here, thank goodness. But again, thank you all so much for turning out. This has been, I think, a really successful afternoon, even if we get milkshaked. Thank you very much. Yeah. In fact, yeah. Before you all go, in fact, could I ask you to sort of stand over there so we can get a photograph of you, if that's all right? With a nice, facial recognition software. Don't worry about it.